Hello! So, if you're familiar with this channel, you know fine well that we like all things weird and unexplained. We cover unsolved mysteries, spooky paranormal encounters, and high strangeness, which pretty much covers all things alien and UFO related. So, I thought I might give this whole compilation thing a wee go. Within this video is a compilation of some of the best alien and UFO cases that I've covered. Who knows? If this video seems to be a good idea, then I might make some more. So what have we got for our first video? Well, this is the strange vanishing and reappearance of Zygmunt Adamski back in 1980 in a tiny wee village in England. This one was definitely one of my favourite cases to research. It just seemed like the deeper I got into it, the more stuff that I uncovered that just blew my face off. I still have no clue what really happened to this poor guy, so let's give it a wee look-see. In the small town of Tingley in England, a bizarre and chilling case emerged that left investigators puzzled. Zygmunt Adamski, a middle-aged man, mysteriously vanished only to reappear days later, lifeless on top of a coal heap. With unexplained marks and a web of intrigue surrounding his fate, the strange case of Zygmunt Adamski continues to baffle investigators and ignite theories of otherworldly involvement. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. You know, I like to cover all sorts of weird and wonderful cases on this channel. This one, however, is one of the strangest and, in my opinion, lesser known cases. What makes it so strange? Well, when we look at the evidence, it truly does seem like there's only one explanation, and it's not from this planet. Let's pop across the border to the quaint village of Tingley, nestled in the beautiful West Yorkshire countryside of England, where there lived a coal miner named Zygmunt Adamski. Zygmunt, originally from Poland, had spent most of his early years in his homeland. However, in 1960, at the age of 37, he and his wife Lottie made a life-changing decision to relocate to the United Kingdom. They were eager to embark on a new journey together, seeking a fresh start. Upon their arrival, Zygmunt and Lottie quickly made new friends and seamlessly settled into the charming rhythm of small-town life in rural England. They were known as a wonderfully content couple, never seeking confrontation and always radiating happiness. Little did anyone anticipate the mysterious turn of events that would soon unfold. Even to this day, his case remains unsolved, leaving behind unanswered questions and a lingering sense of intrigue. On a sunny afternoon on the 6th of June in 1980, Zygmunt, aged 56, left his home on foot with a simple errand in mind: to buy groceries from the local shop. Before embarking on his roughly 1-mile journey into town, he engaged in friendly chat and banter with several neighbours on the way, soaking in the pleasant atmosphere of that peaceful summer's day. Everything appeared to be normal. However, little did Zygmunt, his wife, or anyone else who knew him suspect that this would be the last time they would see him alive. See, Zygmunt never returned from picking up those groceries. He had simply vanished. Well, that wasn't until about a week later Zygmunt would reappear. Everything was not normal. It was 5 days later, on the 11th of June, when a shocking discovery unfolded. Zygmunt's lifeless body was found in a coal yard located in Todmorden, a distance of over 20 miles from his home. It was Trevor Parker, the son of the coal yard owner, who stumbled upon this tragic scene. It was around 3:45 p.m. as Trevor was opening the compound gates to prepare for his afternoon shift. Then he spotted a man's body resting on top of a towering 12-foot coal pile. Instantly realising the gravity of this situation, Trevor wasted no time and promptly alerted the authorities. The officer that received the call was Constable Alan Godfrey of West Yorkshire Police. He made his way quickly to this location. I mean, when the dispatcher told him that a body had been found on a coal pile, he must have figured, that's definitely not a normal call for this quiet area of England. So the constable arrived at the coal yard at approximately 4:10, where he met Trevor Parker, who in turn directed him to a massive coal pile. After PC Godfrey saw the clearly deceased man laying on top, he called in the big dogs. He didn't actually call in dogs. He called in backup, other officers, crime scene techs and CID. Like any police investigation, statements were taken. In this case, the first statement to be taken was that of Trevor Parker's. After all, he was the one that had found this unsettling scene. But his answers, well, they made no sense. When questioned, he revealed that he had last been at that coal yard around 11 AM that morning, emphasising that there had been no sign of Adamski's lifeless body during his earlier visit. That's something that you would notice right away. Parker asserted that he had dutifully closed and secured all the gates before leaving, unaware of anyone else having entered the premises since then. This revelation hinted at an unsettling possibility that the body must have materialised at some point during the intervening 5 hours. Constable Godfrey wasted no time and swiftly called for an ambulance as he arrived at the scene. The paramedics quickly determined that Adamski had suffered a massive cardiac arrest. However, upon closer examination of the circumstances surrounding his demise, a series of suspicious details began to emerge. These ominous factors led the authorities to suspect that foul play might be a part of it. The plot thickens as the investigation unravels even more disturbing details. Firstly, and perhaps most unsettling of all, were the discovery of second-degree burn marks on the back of Zygmunt's neck and shoulders. These burns were inexplicably coated with a peculiar gel-like substance. Such a chilling observation strongly suggested that someone had attempted to treat these injuries whilst Zygmunt was still alive. Secondly, the manner in which Zygmunt was found, along with the overall appearance of his lifeless body, raised serious doubts about a death resulting from natural causes. The circumstances simply did not align with a peaceful passing. There were several pieces of the puzzle that, along with Parker's statement, it made no sense. An eerie and perplexing detail that emerged was the peculiar state of Adamski's clothing. It appeared as though his attire had been haphazardly rearranged by an unfamiliar hand, almost as if someone with little knowledge of dressing and clumsily attempted to redress him after his death. His coat, for instance, was buttoned up the wrong way, while his trousers and belt were improperly fastened and left loose, like someone had just pulled them on and never bothered to button them back up. Even his shoes were left untied. To add to this mystery, Adamski's wife later disclosed that the shirt he had worn on that day of his disappearance was now missing as well, along with his wallet and watch. So they had redressed him, but decided to leave off his shirt. Despite the disarray of his clothing, it was noteworthy that the overall condition of his attire was relatively good and intact. This finding effectively ruled out the possibility that he had been lying rough or had been exposed to the harsh elements during the previous 5 days of his absence. This super confusing mix of clothes that were taken care of really well but put back together all wrong, well, it just made the whole thing even more mysterious. Adding to the ever-growing list of peculiarities, one of the most baffling factors was the immaculate cleanliness of Adamski's body. It was as if he had just emerged from a refreshing shower, despite being missing for nearly a week. Astonishingly, he displayed only 1 day's worth of stubble growth, defying the expected signs of neglect. What made this even more strange was the complete absence of coal dust on his skin or his clothing. This effectively ruled out the possibility that he had ascended the coal pile by himself before eventually succumbing to a heart attack. Lastly, and perhaps the most confounding of all, was the absence of any footprints or indications of disturbance on the coal pile itself. There were no trace of anyone climbing it, or any sign that it had been tampered with in any way. Zygmunt's lifeless body lay on his back, his face turned towards the sky. The scene gave an eerie impression, as if he had been dropped from above, leaving the investigators to grapple with the mystifying circumstances surrounding his final resting place. The mystery deepened with each unanswered question, leaving those involved in the investigation both perplexed and unnerved. PC Godfrey went on to recount a chilling detail: the expression of terror that was etched onto Adamski's contorted face. This unsettling observation was later corroborated by the coroner, who concluded that Adamski must have experienced intense fear or pain, or both, during his final moments. Through the post-mortem examination, it was determined that Mr. Adamski met his untimely demise between the hours of 11 AM and 1 PM on the Wednesday, the very day that his lifeless body was discovered. Surprisingly, it was revealed that Adamski had eaten well during the period that he was missing, with the exception of the day that he passed away. This just raised further intrigue and questions, as it seemed that he had been taken care of during his unexplained absence. Additionally, forensic examination revealed that the burn marks on his neck and shoulders had been inflicted merely 2 days prior to his death. The mysterious gel-like substance that was applied to these burns was subjected to testing at a Home Office laboratory, yet its exact nature still remained unidentified. Curiously, there were no records of Adamski seeking such treatment at any local hospital. As the investigation unfolded, no clear motive or apparent reasons for Adamski's sudden disappearance could be discerned. The puzzle grew more complex with every revelation, leaving investigators and the community perplexed, eager to unravel the truth behind this haunting and unexplained event. Adamski was widely known as a kind-hearted individual, harbouring no known enemies. His mental state was stable, and he had been eagerly anticipating attending a family wedding scheduled for the day after his mysterious disappearance. As news of this case spread, it was accompanied by a series of peculiar elements that simply could not be overlooked. The presence of strange burn marks on his body further deepened the sense of mystery. Speculation regarding the involvement of extraterrestrial abduction began to circulate, gaining traction in the tabloids in the weeks that followed. Although such notions may appear far-fetched, it remains difficult to completely dismiss them, considering the bizarre circumstances surrounding Adamski's fate. Todmorden and its neighbouring regions have gained notoriety as a hotbed for UFO sightings and unexplained phenomena. The intricate nature of this theory finds further support in the intriguing involvement of PC Alan Godfrey, who would later find himself at the centre of his own alleged alien abduction account. In November 1980, approximately 6 months after the discovery of Adamski's lifeless body, a peculiar event unfolded. PC Alan Godfrey found himself on duty in the early hours of the morning. He was responding to bizarre reports of a strange phenomenon. Witnesses claimed to have witnessed a herd of cows materialising and vanishing in various locations throughout a local council estate. Driving along Burnley Road towards the location of the latest sighting, Godfrey's attention was caught by what initially appeared to be an overturned double-decker bus, and it was roughly 200 metres ahead. He couldn't believe his eyes. Concerned that a tragic accident might have occurred involving a shift bus for local coal miners, expecting the worst, he cautiously reduced his speed to assess the situation. However, as his police car drew closer to the crash, he soon realised that it wasn't a bus at all, and whatever it was hovering above the ground. The object that the police officer was now staring at defied all logic. He simply couldn't believe what he was seeing. I mean, this is the stuff of sci-fi movies, and it's happening right in front of him. He would later describe the object as being more of a diamond shape, as opposed to the classic cigar or disc shapes. He said it was very bright as it hovered there, and was estimated to be around 20 foot high and 14 feet wide, and it was spinning silently as it hung in the air. He was confused and scared. His first instinct was to call for backup, for several reasons, but mostly just to get more eyes on this thing. Godfrey attempted to call for backup using both his personal radio and the police radio back in his vehicle, only to find that they were mysteriously non-functional. With no immediate assistance available, he was left with a profound sense of uncertainty. Determined to gather evidence and document this otherworldly encounter, he instinctively noted the time and hastily sketched this peculiar craft. He swiftly sketched the object he was looking at, which took him around 30 seconds, yet as Godfrey finished his sketch and lifted his gaze, the bizarre craft had vanished into thin air. Searching the surroundings for any lingering trace of the craft, he made a terrifying and worrying discovery. His patrol car had inexplicably advanced along the road, moving almost a quarter of a mile from its original position. Bewildered by this strange phenomenon, he glanced at his watch, only to be confronted by another disheartening realisation. Despite the feeling that only a minute had elapsed, nearly half an hour of time had vanished, leaving an unaccounted gap in his memory. To compound the unnerving nature of this encounter, Godfrey would later discover another strange and super creepy detail. The soles of his standard issue police boots showed signs of splitting at the toe, as if he had been dragged along the ground by something. Shortly after this encounter, PC Alan Godfrey returned to the police station, compelled to seek assistance from his colleagues in locating the missing cattle from earlier. Together, they embarked on a search that led them to a rain-soaked field, accessible only through a securely locked gate. Despite the soft ground caused by recent heavy rainfall, there were no traces of any hoofprints to be found. Just like Zygmunt Adamski, it appeared as though the cows had somehow dropped into the field. What is it with aliens and cows? You never see sheep getting abducted, do you? Following standard protocol, Godfrey reported his encounter with this strange object that morning. Astonishingly, he discovered that another driver 3 miles further down the same road had also witnessed a mysterious white light and reported it to the police also. However, the subsequent weeks passed without further incident until an unfortunate turn of events would unfold. See, word of Godfrey's encounter with this strange craft somehow leaked to the press, thrusting him and his department into a whirlwind of embarrassment and scrutiny. Despite being an exemplary officer with 2 commendations for his previous police work, Godfrey found himself isolated by his colleagues and gradually losing favour with his superiors. His once promising career was effectively shattered, and he ultimately made the difficult decision to leave the police force. Years later, Godfrey would undertake several sessions of hypnotic regression, a method that allowed him to recall his otherworldly encounter in greater detail. Under hypnosis, Godfrey recalled that he had been blinded by the light and then passed out. He told the hypnotist that when he awoke, he was in a strange room being examined by several small creatures and a tall humanoid figure with a beard. Again, his claims were met with raised eyebrows and derision. As I said earlier, due to his treatment from his fellow officers and superiors, he had to quit the police force. I mean, would this be enough to quit your career? Several weeks after Godfrey's account had leaked to the newspapers and became an international news story, he was called into his inspector's office. There sat a man in a dark suit and tie who introduced himself as the man from the ministry. Carrying a file in his possession, he held Godfrey's sketch of this peculiar craft. Although Godfrey was not allowed to see the remaining contents of that file, he assumed it also contained his full report of the strange events of that day, as well as the sudden death of Zygmunt Adamski. The individual instructed Godfrey to swear an oath under the Official Secrets Act, binding him to silence regarding what he had witnessed. Reluctantly, Godfrey had to agree. Over the subsequent days, the young policeman encountered this person on multiple occasions, becoming aware of being followed at every turn. Eventually, Godfrey confronted this guy in a local pub and basically told the man to F off. Soon after that conversation, this mysterious man would leave, never to be seen again. The identity of this mysterious individual remained shrouded. Godfrey, however, holds the belief that he was an agent of the MI5, dispatched to dissuade him from pursuing this matter. Another theory suggests that the stranger may have been a representative of the West Yorkshire Police, sent to caution Godfrey against speaking to the media in order to avoid further attention being drawn to the force, which was already facing significant negative publicity back then due to the Yorkshire Ripper case. Or he was one of the men in black. When later recounting the details of the case of Zygmunt Adamski, Godfrey admitted that it was one of the most bewildering assignments that he had ever encountered. While reflecting on his own experiences, he remained uncertain as to whether UFOs played a role in Adamski's demise. However, he did not dismiss this possibility entirely. Fast forward 25 years, and investigators from the British UFO Research Association and other organisations interviewed members of Adamski's family, unearthing some intriguing revelations. Contrary to earlier reports, it was discovered that Adamski had not been eagerly anticipating his goddaughter's wedding. In fact, there had been a deep family rift during that period. A female relative had temporarily moved in with Adamski's family after taking out a restraining order against her own husband. This caused a lot of animosity between the two halves of the family, because the Adamskis were being blamed for taking sides, as often happens during messy separations. In light of these newfound details, Two prevailing theories emerged concerning Adamski's whereabouts during those 5 mysterious days. On one hand, some speculate that he was forcibly abducted by the estranged husband of the female relative, held captive in a secluded shed, and subjected to torment, including the application of battery acid. This prolonged ordeal eventually led to his fatal heart attack. In a state of panic, the estranged husband may have hastily disposed of Adamski's lifeless body at that coal yard, attempting to cover up the heinous crime. Nah. There's just too many elements in this case that make this theory redundant. It is puzzling why Adamski, seemingly a neutral party in this whole family feud, would have been targeted for abduction. What purpose would the kidnapping have served? Additionally, the state of undress that he was found in raises further intrigue. Why was he undressed? And what was the mysterious ointment that was discovered on his skin? If his captor had intended to harm him, as indicated by the burn marks, then why would he have applied ointment afterwards? These peculiar details only deepen the mystery. Furthermore, the choice of dumping Adamski's body on top of a massive coal pile in broad daylight definitely raises some eyebrows. Remember, his body wasn't at that location at 11 AM, but was found there 5 hours later. So it was literally in the middle of the afternoon. Why not conceal it in a more discreet location at a less obvious time of the day, or maybe at night time? How did the individual responsible for dumping the body gain access to the secure coal yard without leaving any trace? These questions highlight the complexities of this case and the need for a deeper exploration of the circumstances which surround Adamski's disappearance and then subsequent discovery. The absence of any arrests or charges in relation to the kidnapping adds another layer of mystery to this case. It becomes evident that this theory falls far short of providing conclusive answers. As a result, many individuals turn their attention to the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement. Could it be that Adamski was somehow abducted by beings from beyond our world? According to this line of thinking, Adamski may have been taken by extraterrestrials on the 6th of June as he made his way to the local shop. It is theorised that he was held in a state of suspended animation, explaining the lack of stubble growth and the appearance of good health upon his emergence. Perhaps he was periodically taken out of stasis for examination or other purposes. Overwhelmed by the shock of this otherworldly encounter, it is suggested that Adamski suffered a massive cardiac arrest, resulting in his untimely demise. Considering the possible involvement of UFOs raises a host of questions. Were these extraterrestrial beings conducting experiments or observing Adamski for some unknown reason? What was their motive for abducting him? And if these otherworldly entities were responsible, how does one reconcile the peculiar details surrounding his body's discovery and the subsequent investigation? In the depths of the enigma surrounding Zygmunt Adamski's disappearance, a chilling detail emerged. See, as the news started to spread like wildfire, it was revealed that not only was Adamski gone, but his prized possessions, that the very essence of his identity, had vanished into thin air. What nefarious purpose could extraterrestrial beings have had for his wallet and watch? Curiously, the accounts of most alien abduction cases hint at a different sort of narrative. While the encounters were undeniably petrifying and occasionally accompanied by unsettling physical discomfort, the captors themselves were often portrayed as somewhat benign, harbouring no ill will towards their subjects. This leaves us to wonder, why did Adamski bear the scars of what appeared to be malicious burns? Could it have been an inadvertent act on the part of the abductors? And if so, what strange concoction did they employ, as its chemical properties defied all attempts of identification by modern science? Perhaps the most confounding aspect of this puzzling ordeal was the manner in which Adamski was unceremoniously discarded on top of a coal heap, bathed in the harsh light of that day. Why would his captors choose such a brazen act, forsaking the shadows where the secrets of their malevolent deeds could forever remain concealed? Was there a tinge of guilt, maybe? Maybe it gnawed at their conscience, compelling them to return him to home, to his loved ones? Regardless of how we see this, the mystery surrounding Adamski's fate remains unsolved. While the plausible scenario of a family feud might offer a semblance of explanation, it falls far from conclusive. Indeed, we cannot dismiss the possibility of alternative hypotheses, no matter how fantastical they seem. The truth, it seems, eludes us. A spectre consigned to the annals of history. Just another unresolved case that time's forgot. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoy this type of content, then please be sure to subscribe and remember the wee bell to be notified so you don't miss another upload. Right, on that note, I'm away for a cup of tea. Take care of yourselves, folks. Tell someone that you love them. And always remember, no matter what, keep smiling. It becomes evident that the theory falls far short of when later recounting this case to years later, Godfrey would undertake several sessions of hypnotic regression, a method that followed him speculation regarding the involvement of extraterrestrials. It becomes evident that this theory falls far short for our second video, we're going to be going across to Zimbabwe to a wee primary school. Now, in most UFO cases, there's usually a witness or two. Usually they see lights in the sky and all that. But in the middle of the day, while 90 school pupils are out in the playground, a UFO arrives. No spoilers, I promise. Let's just get into it. I'm in no doubt that if you've clicked on this video, that you have some interest or knowledge about UFOs. Me personally, I've always had a keen interest in the subject, especially when I was a young kid and teenager. I would buy UFO magazines and watch any documentaries that I could find. But I have to admit, this case blew my mind, mainly because I was amazed that I had never heard of it before. A UFO lands at a school in Zimbabwe, amongst dozens of witnesses in broad daylight. Believe me when I tell you, this will blow your minds. One thing I want to say before I get into this video is, whilst doing my research for this case, as you're about to discover, involves child witnesses, but I want you to keep in mind whilst you watch this video that the children's testimony as to what happened has never changed. In fact, a recent documentary was filmed whereby the makers of said documentary revisited Rua and spoke to the now adult children, having flown them in from all areas of the globe. The children have all grown up now and have a wide range of reputable jobs and have gone on to lead fairly successful lives. To this day, the children and the teachers involved have continued to stick to the original accounts of what happened. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. You're about to watch my first video on this topic. Hopefully there will be more to come. If you have any suggestions of lesser known UFO cases or alien cases, drop me a wee comment and let me know. With that being said, let's get into the video. Let's pop across to Zimbabwe in Africa. It's 1994 and it's a regular school day for the kids and teachers at the aerial school in Rua. Rua is a small agricultural village located about 13 miles to the southeast of the capital, Harare. At the time of the incident, it was barely a town. It was more like a crossroads in an agricultural region. The aerial school was a private school, and the students there were mainly white kids from wealthy families in the area. At the time, the school housed around 90 pupils, with the youngest class being 5-year-olds to the oldest group of 12-year-olds. On September 14th and 15th in 1994, there were several reports of sightings in the area of strange objects in the sky. UFOs, or UAPs as they're more commonly known these days. There were reports of something similar to a bright fireball passing through the sky at night. This fireball or object was said to have travelled at breakneck speeds and had the ability to change direction on a whim, giving a spectacular aerial display to onlookers before zipping off and out of sight. It's worth noting that a local radio station had reported on this and asked its listeners to call in with any reports of sightings of this strange phenomena. And the reports rolled in. People said they saw balls of light in the sky. Some people claimed to have seen metallic objects. In the main though, people simply put all this down to a meteorite entering the atmosphere over the skies of Zimbabwe. However, on the 16th of September, an event would take place in a school in front of all the children in the playground and several members of the teaching staff. One of these teachers, Colin Mackey, actually he was the head teacher of the aerial school, and he was about to hold a meeting with his fellow colleagues. If you are a teacher, then you'll know that the best time for these wee meetings would be when the kids have playtime. As he sat in the staff room, patiently waiting for the faculty to arrive, a short time later the room was filled as the teachers all clambered in, all the while discussing certain students as they'd done so before greeting Mr. Mackey and taking a seat. In his position as head teacher, he was responsible for overseeing the education of the kids in the school, making sure that the national syllabus was being adhered to, and of course the health and safety of the kids placed into his care during their time at the school. These meetings were a regular occurrence and were held to get an overall view of how things were running within the school. Were there any concerns about particular curriculum being delivered? Were there any students that needed particular attention for some reason or another? As the meeting went on, those inside the staff room became aware that a large group of kids in the playground had been progressively getting louder. Something had clearly garnered their attention and was causing widespread audible excitement. Of the 90 or so pupils at the school, 62 of them were out in the playground that day. However, as the disturbance increased, sounds of yelling and excitement would turn into screaming and sounds of fear and alarm. As soon as the faculty became aware of this situation, they all kicked away their seats from underneath them and headed for the exits and out onto the playground to try and uncover what was causing such a massive commotion. Once they all got out into the open air of the schoolyard, they were met with something that would be like in a science fiction movie. Around half of the pupils had broken protocol and had left the protective confines of the playground and were all congregated around a patch of land just across the school boundary. All of the kids were showing intense emotion. Some were stood crying, but more worryingly, some had collapsed to the ground. As the teachers all ran to the children's aid, several of the younger children told the teachers through tears and sobs that they had just witnessed a Compilation. This is an evil spirit from local folklore. However, the older children would tell a different story. They would say that they had seen a little man from another world who had visited them to warn humanity about the future. When the researcher asked where this mysterious visitor had gone, several of the kids simply pointed upwards to the sky, saying that he had flown off back to the heavens. Whether it was aliens or a mythological creature from local folklore, what is certain is that something definitely took place. Mackie would select a handful of the less hysterical and older pupils. He headed back into the school with them, and after ensuring that they were not conferring amongst each other, he sat them down individually apart and presented them with a blank piece of paper and a pencil. He then told them to draw exactly what they had seen. To his amazement and fear, the results were strikingly similar. Whilst all the kids were out in the playground, they all began pointing up to the sky as they could see 3 metallic spherical objects hovering some distance away. A moment later, all 3 objects would vanish in a flash of red light, only to reappear almost immediately. Only this time, they were much closer. In fact, they were only a few meters away from the playground boundary. The objects slowly descended towards the ground, right in front of their very eyes. Some of the younger children felt naturally afraid and would back off, feeling anxious. Several of the older children, however, with their curiosity piqued, would stand fast and wait to see what would happen next. 2 of the objects reascended towards their original position. The remaining object descended into a nearby cluster of trees. This area was strictly off limits to the children due to the danger of poisonous snakes and spiders. However, this didn't stop a few of the older ones opting to run across and investigate further. The children were now through the foliage and standing in the clearing with a clear view of the craft. To their amazement, shock and horror, a being emerged from the top of the craft. Witnesses would later say that they didn't see any visible doorway or hatch that allowed this. Nonetheless, in full view, a creature now stood. The bipedal creature was around 3 foot tall and was dressed in a dark, shiny suit of some sort. Witness accounts said that he was thin with long arms and legs and bulbous black eyes in the shape of a rugby ball. Some of the witnesses also said that his neck was long and thin, whilst others recall him having long hair or a dark hood. The entity floated down from the craft until its feet met with the earth. He appeared to be walking around as if inspecting the grass. At this point, a second figure appeared at the top of the object, much like the first. This proved too much for some of the witnesses, who were sent screaming back to the school building. The creatures became aware of the young audience stood there observing them. The first creature moved a short distance towards the group, only stopping a few meters away, and continued to silently stare at the kids, through its dark eyes. The children would later go on to say that they were overcome by a feeling of despair and hopelessness. Several claimed to have had visions of the world dying around them. They said that the visitors did not speak to them directly. It was more like they were communicating by imprinting images directly into the minds of the youngsters. Images that warned that if Earth's technology advanced too much or were to be used in the wrong manner, then this would mean certain destruction by our own hand. After a few minutes of this, the entity turned round and floated back up to the top of the craft, re-entering the same way it had come out. Then all three objects shot up into the sky at great speed, disappearing in a flash of red light. The head teacher, Colin Mackey, and the rest of the teaching staff would arrive moments later. Mind I said earlier that Mackey had sequestered a few of the older witnesses to draw what they had seen. In total, approximately 35 drawings had been created, depicting what each child had perceived to be an alien visitor that day. The next day, the place was overrun with media and news outlets. In the days following the incident, a number of leading UFO experts also arrived in Rua. After interviewing the witnesses, they eventually left the area with no doubts that the children were telling the truth about what they had seen. The fact that the children had come from various backgrounds, were varied in age, ethnicity and social standing, yet were able to provide near identical account of what happened, was a clear indicator that the story could not have simply been made up. Many of the children were unfamiliar with the concept of aliens or UFOs. These were local youths from poor households and believed what they had experienced were some form of demon or spiritual creature. As I said, this was because they had no form of reference. They simply didn't know what a UFO or an alien would look like. A few days later, it was reported that several eyewitnesses at another nearby school had also seen the same objects. Throughout history, there are countless accounts of people having similar experiences with UFOs and other worldly beings. A lot of these have similar elements to that of the aerial school visitation. Numerous accounts by abductees have claimed that the entities communicated with them via telepathy. There has also been several instances where UFOs have been sighted apparently visiting other schools and teaching facilities. There's a well-documented case from Melbourne in Australia back in the April of 1966. At 11 AM that morning, several pupils who were in attendance at West Hall High School ran to tell teachers that an odd-looking craft was hovering over the school playground. The news spread throughout the school, and the entire school building pretty much emptied out into the playground. Around 300 witnesses made their way outside to see what the commotion was. Witnesses there claimed that the craft that they saw was oval-shaped and was the size of two large cars stuck together. In a similar fashion to the aerial school visitor, this object slowly descended to the ground a short distance from the school into a patch of trees nearby. To the amazement and excitement of onlookers, 5 military fighter jets appeared overhead and began to circle the area. The craft responded by ascending back up to the afternoon sky, and only after engaging in a game of cat and mouse with the military, the craft shot off over the horizon at great speeds. The next day, an assembly was called, and the head teacher informed the students that they were forbidden from discussing the incident with anyone. Military officials had also attended the school in the subsequent days and simply told all those involved that they were mistaken. There were also reports of official-looking men dressed all in black inspecting the tree line where the craft had landed. Another thing to note, during the Rua incident at the aerial school, one of the teachers there, she had came out and said that she didn't believe the children and that she didn't see anything and that it was nothing more than an elaborate prank. However, in a 2021 documentary about this case, she was interviewed on camera and came out saying that she did in fact see the craft that day, but she was so afraid that she went straight into instant denial. She publicly apologised for not believing the children that day. So, what have we to make of all this? What's your thoughts? Is it as the reports say, aliens from another galaxy visiting us? Or are we utterly alone in the universe? Theories range from mass hysteria to a well-engineered prank. Another interesting theory is that these beings that have been reported over the past 100 years are actually humans greatly evolved from a far-off future. They have the ability of interdimensional travel and have outgrown things like verbal language. To be honest, There are gazillions of cases that I could discuss here. I may well cover more UFO encounters at a later date. If you have enjoyed your time here today, please consider subscribing. It only takes a wee second and it means that you'll know when I upload more videos, and besides that, it helps my channel to grow and ensure that I can make more content. Keep a wee eye out for dodgy flying saucers, stay safe, and remember, keep smiling. Next up, we have the case of the Smiling Man, or, as he's otherwise known, Indrid Cold. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with that name, then you soon won't be. There's way more to this story than meets the eye. In fact, there's way more to this story than is even in this video. This Indrid Cold entity is involved in so many high-profile cases, including Mothman, so let's get a wee cup of tea on the go and dive in. Think back to when you were a kid. An abstract concept known worldwide as the boogeyman is widely known and depicted in various ways across countless cultures all throughout history. For some people, it was a creature that lived under the bed and would snatch your ankles if you dared put a foot to the ground. I remember when I was younger, I would leap from my bed into the doorway so that the boogeyman couldn't get me. Oftentimes it would be the darkness of an unlit closet that would provide the hellscape for what horrors lay within. Parents all over the world check under kids' beds and in their closets prior to saying goodnight, to offer reassurance that monsters don't exist, giving the child a sense of comfort and security, at least for that moment. But what if? Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Today we're going to have a wee look at the chilling and terrifying accounts of people that have come face to face with a particular boogeyman. So sit back, relax and get your cup of tea ready, all cosy and safe. And remember, there's no such thing as monsters. So not too long ago we watched a new movie called Smile. We love our horror movies in our house, and to be fair, not much scares us these days. But this one, let's just say I needed to change my pants. It was after that we watched it, I was sure I had come across a similar true story called The Grinning Man. After doing a bit of digging, I found it. The Grinning Man is said to enter people's homes in the dead of night, only to stand silently watching while they sleep. On the surface, the image of the Grinning Man doesn't seem all that terrifying. He doesn't have big black eyes like that of an alien. He doesn't have the hulking mass of a Bigfoot or the glowing red eyes of a Mothman. But there is something far simpler that disturbs those that encounter him to the core. He is described as being 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular physique. He has small, beady eyes which seem to be set unnaturally apart on his face. His face and head are completely bald, lacking any sign of eyebrows, even eyelashes. The other simple yet terrifying feature is the fact that he sports a constant, wide and menacing grin. Witnesses have said that his mouth smiles, but his eyes do not. They also report that aside from the nightmarish smile, that they have an overwhelming feeling of pure dread, almost like they are staring death in the face. The earliest recorded sighting of the Grinning Man happened back on the 11th of October in 1966 in the small city of Elizabeth in New Jersey. Two young lads by the name of James Yankaitis and Martin Munov were returning home from the movies at around 9:45 p.m. They were walking along New Jersey and 4th Street. They found themselves walking underneath the New Jersey Turnpike. It was late at night, and under the turnpike in that tunnel was not the best place for two young lads to be. The constant groan of traffic several feet above their heads, with only small slivers of light eking their way into the underpass from the streetlights on the road above. I can only imagine that their walking pace took on a much faster step as the two boys scrambled to get out the other side. Running along the path that the boys were walking on was a high chain-link fence. Directly on the other side of that fence was a concrete slope which led up to the underside of the turnpike overpass. There was a rumour going around that night that a woman had been chased nearby by a huge man wearing a dark green suit. Although this was in the forefront of the boys' minds, they continued chatting about happy things as they nervously negotiated their way towards the mouth of the tunnel. The boys were almost out and back to open skies when James suddenly noticed someone standing on the other side of the fence. He nudged his friend and said, "Who's that?" Martin turned and both boys noticed a figure standing in the short bushes. He was extremely tall and well built. The boys said that he was wearing a green suit that was almost reflective, and his full attention was on a house across the street about 200 metres away. He didn't seem to notice the boys at first. He didn't even notice they were there. But after a few moments, the figure slowly turned to face them. The boys would later say that he was the strangest man they had ever seen, and that his face didn't even seem human. The most disturbing thing was, he was just staring blankly at them, not moving, and grinning the entire time. It's safe to say that the lads hot-footed it out of there and didn't stop running until they reached the safety of their homes. As a remarkable coincidence, famous author and UFO expert John Keel was in the area shortly after that encounter. John Keel was the guy that we spoke about in a previous video about the Men in Black. He's the dude that wrote and investigated the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant. He heard about the boys' story and set up an interview with the consent of their parents, in which Keel would speak to the boys separately. A proven technique for getting to the truth of the matter and preventing any collusion. Both boys gave the exact same description. They both also indicated to Keel that the exact spot where they saw the strange entity. It was discovered that the UFO sighting that Keel was there to investigate had occurred on the very same night that the boys had this strange encounter. It wouldn't take long before connections and parallels were drawn and conclusions were made as to the otherworldly origins of this grinning man. The next eyewitness account occurred around 500 miles west of Elizabeth in West Virginia. A sewing machine salesman by the name of Woodrow Derenberger was driving along Interstate 77 late at night on the 2nd of November in 1966, when a strange object had fell from the sky and landed on the road in front of him, causing him to perform an emergency stop. It was a large metallic disc-shaped craft that took up the entire road, as Derenberger stayed at the wheel of his vehicle with the headlights shining on this strange object. A tall being would emerge. He described it as having wide-set eyes and a huge grin which stretched across its entire face. Then, the being approached Derenberger. This time, similar to the New Jersey sighting, this grinning being was wearing a one-piece reflective suit. Only this time it was said to be a blue colour and was also reflective. He reported that the being spoke to him, but it was telepathically. He asked him about a strange glow on the horizon, not realising that it was just the lights of a distant town. Derenberger would go on to say that the entity referred to himself as Indrid Cold, a name that didn't mean anything to anyone at the time, but would gain much notoriety in the decades to come.
He said, "Do not be afraid. My name is Indrid Cold."
Indrid Cold asked Derenberger several questions before returning to his craft and leaving the area. But before he done so, he told the salesman that he would be seeing him again. This event happened only 2 weeks before the famous Mothman sightings occurred in Point Pleasant, and many people still believe that these two incidents are linked. There was another sighting of the grinning man around Point Pleasant during the whole Mothman saga. The Lilly family were experiencing strange goings-on in their home, weird occurrences and events which all pointed towards classic poltergeist activity. Things happened fairly abruptly for the family. Objects were being thrown around the room, doors and windows were being slammed, and there were strange lights in the sky above their home. The family endured this barrage of torment 24/7, day and night, affording them no respite from the terrifying ordeal. However, it was the youngest daughter, Linda, that would experience the most horrific aspect of this strange activity. At around 1:45 AM on the 14th of December 1966, Linda came running into her parents' bedroom, screaming in terror. She had been awoken by a strange clicking sound. When she opened her eyes, she was horrified to see a strange figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a man, A big man, very tall. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. I screamed again and hid under the covers. When I looked again, he was gone. It's safe to say that the poor lassie didn't go back to her own bed for quite some time, and who could blame her, right? After a wee while, all the strange goings-on stopped, just as quickly as they started. Wee Linda would return back to her own bed, and the Lilly family never experienced anything strange ever again. From 1966 until 1967, several people in Provincetown, Massachusetts would report having several encounters with this grinning man. They would all have the same description: a tall, muscular figure with a permanently fixed grin. It's said that the details of these reports do exist as newspaper clippings from local newspapers, but to date they've not been published anywhere online. But hey, these sightings aren't exclusive to the US. There was an incident right here in Scotland. Wait, what? The grinning man was here in Scotland? Are you serious? I never knew that when I'd started this story. A young woman by the name of Mary Elizabeth McCrae would have an extremely horrifying encounter which would cause her problems for years afterwards. Mary and her husband Alan lived on the outskirts of a small village on the edge of the Cairngorms National Park called Dunkeld. Hang on, are you kidding me? Dunkeld? We were just there. Well, I won't be sleeping tonight. Right, back to the story. At the time of the incident, the couple were in their mid-50s and their kids had all grown up and flew the coop, which just left the couple together enjoying the peace and quiet. Their house was fairly remote and the closest neighbour lived about a mile away, but they loved their own space and privacy. On the night of the 23rd of November in 1972, Mary and Alan went to bed. They would sit up together reading before turning the lights off and going to sleep. Mary reported that she was awoken in the wee hours of the morning by a strange and indistinct clicking noise. When she opened her eyes, she found herself lying on her front and was struggling to breathe. Sleep paralysis is a fairly common thing these days. Well, it was always a common thing, but only in recent years has it been diagnosed and recognised as what it is. In the past, including the 70s, people didn't really know what it was, so it would have been reasonable for people to assume the worst. Mary was terrified and unable to do anything about it. The clicking noise only grew louder as Mary lay there helpless on her front. It got so loud that it almost pierced her eardrums, and then a thought suddenly dawned on her. As she flicked her eyes frantically left and right, she remembered that prior to coming to bed, she had closed the curtains. Something of a ritual that they certainly did every night. Yet the curtains were now open. She had this overwhelming feeling that she was being watched. She detected a slight movement in the periphery of her vision, and her attention was now focused on the bottom left pane of the bedroom window. To her complete horror, Mary saw a face on the other side of the glass staring right back at her. It had small, dark eyes and was fixed with a horrifying demonic grin. She found herself staring at this grinning face, almost as if she was transfixed. To her horror, she felt her body gently float up off the bed and beginning to move towards the window. As full-scale panic set in, Mary tried to scream, but nothing came out. She was still unable to move. Mary would later say that she completely blacked out at this point and awoke as normal the next morning. She would suffer awful headaches in the weeks after. Mary's first thoughts were that, well, it must have been a dream if it were not for the fact that the curtains were still open. Mary passed away in 2013 at the age of 94, but the memory of that night stayed with her until the day she died. Taking all of these occurrences into account, the main question is, who is the grinning man? Or should I say, what is the grinning man? Is it one single entity, or are there many iterations of him? Could it be an extraterrestrial race that have adorned a fixed grin because, well, they believe that it could make them more friendly when they interact with humans? The clicking sound heard by Mary and the Linda Lilly encounter are common aspects of alien abductions. Some abductees have also came by the name of Indrid Cold, similar to the name stated to Woodrow Derenberger during his experience.
Who is this?
My name is Indrid Cold.
A similar encounter happened in Italy in December of 1979. A guy by the name of Pier Zanfretta, who allegedly had a history of being abducted by aliens, claimed to have been contacted by the grinning man shortly before one of these abductions. He also said that this man referred to himself as Indrid Cold. Throughout his life, Woodrow Derenberger would go on to say that he was visited many times by the same being claiming to have the name Indrid Cold, the same entity he met on the road that dark night back in 1966. Derenberger also claimed that he was visited by other forms of this grinning man, who identified themselves as Carol Ardo and Demo Hassan. Even his wife went on record and said that she encountered these beings and that she firmly believes that their agenda was nothing but evil. There's a clear connection between these encounters and that of the Mothman. Many people believe the Mothman is an extraterrestrial being. Many theorists believe that the grinning man, Indrid Cold, and the Mothman are all the same thing. See, the thing is, if we have a look at all of these accounts with Sherlock Holmes' critical way of thinking, it's clear that at least 3 of the reported sightings of this grinning man all begin and end with the writer John Keel. He was the first to write about them in his own books and of course would have taken artistic liberties and applied his own biases. It happens all the time and continues to happen here on YouTube. It's no secret that when people like me are researching a topic, not only do we use Google, Reddit and any sources of information, but we also watch other YouTube videos, and it's clear that some creators fudge the truth to fit their own narrative, and some just make stuff up. I personally feel it's important to stay true to the source material, whether it be original accounts from newspaper articles, or fact-checking, even locations and dates. This is all very time-consuming, but it's worth it if by the end of any given video, both you and I want a clearer picture of what's going on. Whether the grinning man is real, or something born out of the creative mind of a writer, prompting copycats to develop and exaggerate their own stories, one thing is for sure, the story's here to stay. That's it for this video, folks. Thanks ever so much for taking the time to watch this and hang out with me. If you like my content, then you go on and subscribe, or share my channel. Tell other like-minded folk to come along and have a look. Take care of yourselves, and as always, keep smiling. For the next video, we're going to be discussing the Men in Black phenomenon. I want to apologise in advance for the awful editing in this video and my shite attempts at humour. I think I'm way funnier than I actually am, something that my wife and daughter likes to remind me of daily. When I was a kid, I remember reading a book about Men in Black and it completely blew my face off. In the book I remember there was a detailed story of an MIB visiting this guy. I can't remember his name, I think it was Albert Bender or something like that, but he made a coin vanish in this guy's hand. And I remember thinking to myself, that is a cool magic trick. Anyway, enough waffling on, enjoy the video. Who are the real Men in Black? We all know who they are, right? These guys. They're our first, last and only line of defense against the alien threat. They live in secret and exist in shadow. And they dress in black. They protect us from such threats as this guy, this wee dude, and... wait, hang on. If aliens look like that, then I don't think I'll need much protection.
Take me! Take me!
Of course movies, TV shows and comic books portray them in this way, as heroes that protect the Earth. But what's the true story behind these mysterious, seemingly all-male organisation? What I can tell you is that they do exist, but this video is not to question their existence. This video is to uncover why, who in fact are they and what is their purpose? A purpose that's darker than the black suits that they wear. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Let's dive down this rabbit hole and ask the question that brought us all to this point. Who are the real Men in Black? So it's fair to say that the image portrayed in the movies is not a true depiction of the actual Men in Black, right? Save for maybe the fact that they wear black suits. In reality, the true nature of the MIB is far darker and way more terrifying. Some people say that they are a secret government agency deployed to debunk, dispel and discourage people from investigating and talking about incidents involving aliens and UFOs. And this is closer to the truth than first thought. But there are a lot more people that believe that these agents are not even human, and there's evidence to support this theory. The existence of the Men in Black goes back to the earliest reports, roughly when UFOs became prevalent in the public eye. Many experts say that this all happened after Roswell in 1947. They claim to be from a government agency or from a branch of the military, depending on the type of encounter and its geographical location. Encounters with the Men in Black come from all corners of the earth. It's safe to say that there have been cases and sightings in most countries. In the UK, they may well show up and identify themselves as part of the Royal Air Force or the Army. In the States, they might say that they work for the CIA or the Secret Service. But there are elements that link each and every one of these encounters. They almost always arrive in a pair. They dress from head to toe in a neat black suit. They more often than not wear thick black shades, despite being indoors or even at night. They will wear a black fedora-style hat, and in every case reported, they have sickly white skin and speak in a very monotone voice with a nondescript accent. They are expressionless and often exhibit strange behaviours considered to be not human. So we've established what they look like and all that. Let's get into some of the most terrifying reports of first-hand encounters with the Men in Black. So let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Puget Sound in Washington in 1947. Harold Dahl was out on a wee boat with his son and dog doing some fishing. He reported that as he was in the bay just off Maury Island, he suddenly saw 6 donut-shaped objects above them in the sky. He went on to say that one of these objects seemed damaged and broke apart in the sky. The subsequent debris injured his son and killed his dog. Dahl also said that he was able to take photographs of the craft and the debris. Getting back onto dry land, Dahl took these photos to his boss. Obviously the man was sceptical, but he himself went with Dahl to the area, and both men were shocked to see one of the craft still hovering nearby. The very next day, a black Buick pulled up outside the Dahl home. A man dressed all in black and wearing dark glasses got out and spoke to Dahl. He claimed to be a government employee, and he asked Dahl if he could speak with him over breakfast. Both men went into the local diner and ordered food. During the meal, the man in black told Dahl that he must stop talking about what he had seen, or his son would suffer the same fate as the dog. The agent took any copies of the photographs in Dahl's possession. Now, although this incident could well have been something else other than a man in black, it's safe to say that from here on in, encounters with these men in black will only get stranger. Many of the incidents involving Men in Black that we hear stories and reports of today come courtesy of the late John Keel. He's famous for investigating the Mothman, a cryptid supernatural creature that plagued the city of Point Pleasant in West Virginia back in the late 1960s. The Mothman is a whole other story that I might consider doing a future video on. If you'd like to see such a video, then be sure to let me know in the comments below. John Keel ended up writing a now famous book called The Mothman Prophecies. The thing is, during his research for this book, he discovered that after interviewing several witnesses in Point Pleasant about the Mothman, that most of them spoke of visits from the Men in Black that were there to intimidate and threaten them not to discuss what they had seen. One of these witnesses that Keel spoke to was a journalist called Mary Heyer. She was working on the Mothman story back in 1967 for a small newspaper called the Athens Messenger. She was working late one night when a stranger walked into her office. She described him as being under 5 feet tall, even although he was wearing obvious platform black shoes. He had raven black hair that was styled in a bowl cut. He was wearing thick rimmed glasses, under which was a pair of piercing hypnotic eyes. He opened the conversation with Miss Heyer by asking directions to another town in West Virginia called Walsh. As he was speaking, he continually moved closer to the woman. Feeling uneasy at the man's strange demeanour, she picked up the phone and called her manager to come to her office, as he was also working late in the same building. The man decided to leave straight away, but not before picking up a pen from Heyer's desk. According to Heyer, he seemed to be obsessed with the pen. She said it was almost as if he had never seen one before. About 6 weeks later, she would see the same man again. This time, he was watching her from across the street. As Heyer noticed him, a black Buick turned up, the man jumped into the car and they sped away. That would be the last time she would see him. There are countless Men in Black stories, each one more strange than the last. One of the strangest ones took place in Owatonna, Minnesota in 1966. A woman called Mrs. Butler and her friend were out for a walk one night when they saw two strange lights in the sky. According to Butler and her friend, one of the lights swooped down towards them and Butler fell to the ground as if she was having a seizure. She was able to pick herself up to her knees, at which point her friend continually asked if she was okay. It was reported that Butler began to speak in a voice that sounded robotic and laboured. She asked one question: "What is your time cycle?" before snapping out of the trance-like state, and the mysterious orb flew away into the sky. Mrs. Butler, after being interviewed by John Keel, went on to say that she continually got weird phone calls in the night with no one on the other side, only a strange clicking noise. Then, one afternoon, she got a visit from a man identifying himself as an Air Force officer called Major Richard French. French had a keen interest in UFOs and just wanted to talk to her further. She said that he was dressed very smartly in a black suit and drove a brand new black coloured Mustang. She also went on to say that his hair was pretty long, too long for that of an Air Force major. The very next day, the man would return and Butler invited him inside. Shortly after him entering the house, he began to exhibit what she described as stomach cramps. "Not to worry though, big fella. Mrs. Butler has the perfect home remedy," and she presented the man with a bowl of homemade jelly, or Jello if you're in the States. But the man just stared at it, confused, like he had never seen it before. Butler instructed him that, well, you use the spoon and you eat it like food. He still didn't understand, and instead discarded the spoon and tried to drink the bowl of Jello like it was soup. It was later reported during investigation of this incident that there was indeed a Major French stationed at a nearby airbase, yet he denies ever contacting or even knowing Mrs. Butler. This was corroborated when a photo of the real Richard French was shown to Butler, to which she said, "Yeah, that's definitely not the man that was here." Another encounter was that of Peter Rajevich. He was a folklore expert, and in 1987 he was writing a book about belief in other worlds. One afternoon he was in his local library researching and reading a book about UFOs when he was approached by a man in a black suit. The stranger asked him what he was reading. When Rajevich replied the book was about flying saucers, the stranger then asked him if he believed they were real. Rajevich replied by saying that he was a folklorist and didn't care if it was real or not. He was more interested in the witness accounts. This seemed to anger the strange man in black, who angrily said that UFOs are the most important fact of the century, before composing himself and calmly saying, "Be well on your journey." He then turned and walked away. Rajevich said that the stranger's accent was very generic and nondescript, and when he walked away it was a strange, fluid, almost like a robotic walk. Rajevich tried to follow the man only once he rounded the corner. He was shocked to see that not only was the stranger gone, but there was no one else in the library. In a more recent incident with the Men in Black, CCTV footage captured them entering the lobby of a hotel in Canada. In 2012, Shane Sovar was the manager of a hotel in Niagara Falls, but back in 2008, Shane was witness to a UFO incident in the area and had only recently sat down with members from a group called the Aerial Phenomena Investigations. These strangers entered the hotel and began asking the staff about Sovar, who wasn't in work that day. One of the bellboy staff called Sovar on the phone at home and explained the weird encounter with these men asking strange questions. The bellboy went on to say that both of them spoke in similar generic accents and had pale, sickly skin, but strangest of all was that both men had no facial hair, none, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and were clearly wearing wigs. He also went on to say another strange detail was that during the entire conversation, they didn't blink. Possibly the most terrifying encounter with the Men in Black was reported by Dr. Herbert Hopkins in Maine back in 1976. Hopkins was researching a UFO case for a local investigative group when he got a telephone call from a man claiming to be a fellow UFO researcher. The stranger on the other end of the line asked if he could come to visit Hopkins in order to discuss his findings and compare notes, to which Hopkins agreed. Within a minute of hanging up the phone, there was an abrupt knock at the door. When Hopkins answered it, he was amazed when the person introduced themselves as the man on the phone. Now, remember, this was 1976. Not like he could have been standing right outside on a cell phone. Hopkins described this man the exact same as the rest of the Men in Black stories that we've covered here. He was tall, in a black suit and completely bald. No eyebrows, no eyelashes, and appeared to be wearing some sort of lipstick or paint to give his lips some colour. Hopkins invited the guy into his home. Immediately his dog started barking at the tall pale man. The stranger opened the conversation by saying, "You have 2 coins in your pocket." Remarkably, this was true, and Hopkins was confused as to how he could have known this. The stranger then requested that Hopkins remove one of the coins and hold it out in the palm of his hand. Curious to see what was going on, Dr. Hopkins did as he requested. He said that he felt a strange heat coming from the coin before it seemed to change colour and vanish completely from his open hand. The stranger then asked him if he knew the name Barney Hill. For context, Betty and Barney Hill were the most famous alien abductees in history, and again could well be the subject of a later video for me. Hopkins replied saying that he was familiar with the Hill case, although he was aware that Barney Hill had passed away long ago. The stranger nodded and said, "Yeah, that's correct, because Hill suddenly didn't have a heart. The same way you don't have a coin." He then suggested that Hopkins cease all research into the UFO case he was working on. This encounter scared Hopkins so much that he did as the man suggested. He destroyed all of his research and stopped investigating the case. Reports of the Men in Black are certainly not just limited to the United States. Many encounters have occurred across the globe. Modern descriptions of these anomalous individuals can be traced back to the 50s. The thing is, this phenomenon not only predates the 50s, but goes further back, way further. During the Middle Ages, people often spoke of strange men dressed in black robes and wearing black hats, malevolent entities that seemed to possess and demonstrate inhuman abilities and were odd to look at. Descriptions of these strange men were always the same throughout that time, regardless of geographical location. This led many to believe that it was one man, and that man was the devil. Bearing in mind, it was the Middle Ages. So who are the Men in Black? Well, there are 2 main theories. Theory 1 is that these strangers are of extraterrestrial origin, and that they disguise themselves to try and look as human as possible in efforts to control information and silence those that could blow the lid off UFO sightings. Theory 2 is that they are human and choose to shave off their eyebrows and all that stuff to make themselves more intimidating to witnesses. But then there is a third theory, and one which most people in the fringe community subscribe to, that it's a mix of both, that there are shadow government agencies at work to debunk, dispel and cover up UFO cases, that they work in conjunction with extraterrestrial beings in a joint effort to achieve their goals. So what do you think? Human? Not human? Or is it all just a load of nonsense? Let me know. I'm keen to hear what you guys think. Thanks again for hanging out with me today. Stay safe out there, folks, and remember, keep smiling. So the next one is the abduction, or well, alleged abduction of Travis Walton. Again, I remember being in high school and my friend Woody was waving a VHS tape above his head shouting, "You need to see this!" That movie was called Fire in the Sky, and it was the true story of Travis Walton. Although a wee bit exaggerated, as you would imagine from Hollywood. Either way, I think we both wore out that tape after watching it so many times. Let me know what you think of this case down in the comments. Let's go. Imagine being abducted by aliens. Imagine being taken aboard their spaceship, subjected to a series of tests and being terrified out of your mind. That's what Travis Walton claims happened to him back in 1975. Walton's story is one of the most controversial UFO cases in history. Some people believe that he was telling the truth, while others think that he was lying or suffered some sort of mental breakdown. But one thing is for sure, Walton's story is gripping and intriguing. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. In this video, we will explore the Walton abduction case in detail. We will examine the evidence, hear from witnesses, and discuss the various theories about what actually happened. We'll also try to answer the question, was Travis Walton abducted by aliens? People have been buzzing about UFOs for the longest time, sparking curiosity in some and scepticism in others. Recently, there's been a fresh wave of information. If you don't know what I'm talking about or referring to, then here's a wee rundown. So on July 26, 2023, the House Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on National Security held a public hearing on Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon, or UAPs, commonly known as UFOs. This was the first public hearing on UFOs held by Congress in over 50 years. The hearing was sparked by a whistleblower named David Grush, a former intelligence official who alleged that the government has been covering up evidence of UFOs for decades. Grush claimed that the government has recovered downed UFOs and non-human biological materials from crash sites. 3 retired military pilots also testified at this hearing, recounting their own encounters with UAPs. One pilot, Ryan Graves, said that he saw a fleet of UAPs flying over the Atlantic Ocean back in 2019. He described these UAPs as being white tic-tac shaped objects that were able to outmaneuver his F-18 fighter jet. The Pentagon has denied Grush's claims of a cover-up, but they have acknowledged that they are investigating UAP sightings. In June of 2021, the Pentagon established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, to centralise the investigation of UAPs. The AARO is still in its early stages, but it has already made some progress. In May of 2023, the AARO released a report that identified 5 potential explanations for UAP sightings. 1. Airborne clutter. 2. Natural atmospheric phenomena. 3. US government or allied technology. 4. Foreign government technology. And 5. Other. This report also stated that the AARO has been unable to explain the majority of UAP sightings. This suggests that the government still has a lot to learn about these UAPs. The US congressional hearings on UAPs in July of 2023 were a significant event. They showed that the government is taking UAP sightings seriously and that it is committed to investigating them. The hearings also raised awareness of this UAP issue among the public. Opinions are split, with some believing in extraterrestrial life and others not giving it much thought. But let's dive into this intriguing tale of Travis Walton, which stands out in the world of UFO stories. Before we started tossing around terms like organic non-human life forms, which is just a fancy way of saying aliens, there's this captivating account from 1975 involving a guy called Travis Walton. He was a young logger from Arizona, and he claims that he was whisked away by a UFO. Some folks take every word he says as gospel, while others suspect the whole thing is nothing but a big fabrication. So as we look into this bonkers and terrifying story, let's keep one question in mind. Did it actually happen? Travis Walton was born on 10th of February 1953 in Snowflake, Arizona. He was the third of 7 children born to Mary Walton. Walton grew up on a ranch outside of Snowflake and attended Snowflake Union High School. After high school, he worked as a logger for a few years. In 1975, he was a member of a 7-person logging crew that was working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. This whole incident, also known as the Fire in the Sky event, went down on November 5th, 1975 in the Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. Travis, a 22-year-old at the time, was part of a logging crew of 6 guys working alongside his close buddy Mike Rogers. What occurred that night became one of the most prominent UFO abduction stories ever. On that particular day, the crew had been putting in a hard day's work in the forest. Now, when you think of Arizona, a vast desert might come to mind, but surprise, surprise, they were in a massive forest being cleared for logging. So picture this. It's Wednesday the 5th of November 1975, as I said, just an ordinary workday for Travis. They wrap up their work at the Apache Sitgraves National Forest, and Travis, along with his 6-man crew, is heading back home. As they are descending the mountain in their truck, they notice this incredibly bright light piercing through the trees. So they drive closer, and it becomes clear that this source is a strange craft. The truck comes to a sudden stop, and Travis, showing some serious guts, decides to hop out and investigate. So there's this strange metallic craft hovering silently in the clearing. Travis has already bailed out of the truck and is moving towards it. From the truck, his fellow crew members are screaming at him just to get away and get back to the truck. Travis estimated that the object had a diameter of about 15 or 20 feet and was roughly 8 to 10 feet thick. Its shape resembled 2 oversized pie pans placed lip to lip, with a small rounded bowl inverted on the top. The white dome peaked slightly above the ship's upper outline, and darker stripes with a dull silver sheen divided the glowing surface into panel-like sections. The dim yellowish light emanating from the craft had the sheen of hot metal fresh from a blast furnace. They couldn't spot any visible antennae, protrusions, hatches, ports or windows on the craft. It appeared completely motionless and soundless, almost like it was suspended dead in the air. Suddenly, he was startled by a sudden surge in the volume of vibrations coming from this craft. It sounded like numerous turbine generators springing to life. He instinctively crouched down just as a blinding blue-green ray shot from the bottom of the craft. In an instant, his senses were overwhelmed. He saw and heard nothing. All he felt was an electrifying jolt, as if struck by a high-voltage surge. This intense bolt made a sharp cracking sound, and Travis was enveloped by the stunning force of this beam, striking him fully in the head and chest. His consciousness rapidly faded into a deep, unfeeling darkness. From the moment that he felt that paralysing blow, he lost sight, sound and sensation altogether. The men in the truck witnessed Travis's body arching backwards, limbs outstretched as the force of the blow propelled him off the ground. He was thrown clear through the air, landing about 10 feet away. His right shoulder collided with the hard rocky surface of the ridge. Lying there lifelessly, he lay sprawled out on the ground. The entire forest lit up brighter than daytime. All the crew members, including the boss and truck driver, lose their wits and hightail it out of there just as fast as they can, leaving Travis behind. These guys have obviously never seen Band of Brothers, right? The guys were thumping the back of Mike's seat and screaming for him to get the hell out of there. Well, Mike didn't need to be told twice. He was already frantically searching for the ignition switch. His trembling fingers eventually found the key, and the engine roared to life. Mike pushed the truck through the boulder-strewn trail, swerving this way and that as he navigated the treacherous road. "Is it following us?" he shouted over his shoulder. No one answered. "Is it after us?" he yelled once more. When no reply came again, he turned to see the crew, their faces frozen in shock, staring straight ahead with vacant expressions. The 6 seasoned woodsmen were reduced to a state of mindless terror in response to the horrifying spectacle they had just witnessed. So, after that bizarre encounter, the crew had no clue what they had just seen. They were completely puzzled, but a few minutes later they decided to go back and help Travis if they could. When they returned though, Travis was nowhere to be found. They searched around for a while, but it was like he had just vanished into thin air. With no other options, they drove into town and then contacted the local sheriff. At 7:30 PM that night, Ken Peterson, a member of the logging crew, made a frantic phone call to the local sheriff's office. He reported that their friend Travis had gone missing. Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison rushed to the shopping centre in Heber, Arizona, because that's where the crew was gathered. The men were visibly shaken, with 2 of them unable to hold back their tears as they described what they had witnessed. Deputy Ellison, he had a hard time believing their surreal account. He thought, if they were faking it, they're doing a remarkable job. He decided to inform his supervisor, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie, who arrived an hour later with another police officer. They listened to the harrowing story from the 6 loggers, with Rogers, the lead crewman, insisting on going back into the forest to search for his missing friend, even though they didn't have any sort of tracking dogs with them. As the 3 remaining crew members, still too upset, decided to head home to share the news with their families and friends, the search party began to grow. More police and volunteers joined the efforts at the location of the alleged alien encounter. Despite their thorough search, the police officers couldn't find any physical evidence to support the loggers' story. This obviously raised doubts about the credibility of the account and heightened concerns that Travis might be lost or in danger, succumbing to the cold. The following day, so November 6th, Mike and another officer, Ken Copeland, they paid a visit to Travis's mum, Mary Collette, who lived on a small ranch in Bear Creek, which was about 10 miles outside of Snowflake. When they told her what had happened to her son, Mrs. Collette remained remarkably calm and reserved. She simply asked if anyone other than the police and the folks who were there has heard this story. Officer Copeland found her reaction and behaviour quite unusual, which made the police even more suspicious that there might be more to Travis's disappearance than this UFO abduction story. Early that morning, officials and volunteers gathered once more to comb the entire area, but they still couldn't find any signs of what happened to Travis. This only strengthened their suspicion that the UFO story might be a cover-up for some sort of accident or even something more serious like foul play. By the afternoon, the police had already left, which infuriated Mike and Travis's older brother Dwayne. They thought that not enough follow-up searches were conducted. Later on that day, the police launched a more extensive search for Travis. They brought out the helicopters, officers on horseback, and jeeps to scour the area. Strangely, despite the odd bluish-green light that had forcibly lifted Travis into the air and then dropped him on the ground, there was no evidence of an explosion, there was no blood, torn clothing, or any signs of a physical struggle, even among the loggers themselves. After the strange incident, investigators separately questioned the 6 witnesses, and they all shared remarkably similar descriptions of what they believed was a UFO. Mike Rogers described it as a large, glowing object hovering just below the treetops, about 100 feet away from him. Dwayne described it as smooth, emitting a yellowish orange light, and other witnesses had similar observations, describing it as an unbelievably smooth, flat disc with well-defined edges. Their accounts of the events leading up to Travis's disappearance were consistent, which they hoped would prove that their story was true. In fact, Mike and the 5 other men were willing to take lie detector tests to support these claims. On November 8th, 3 days after this puzzling incident, and with Travis still missing, the crew members underwent polygraph tests conducted by Cy Gilson, a polygraph examiner from the Department of Public Safety, associated with the Arizona State Police. Mr. Gilson asked them critical questions, such as whether they had caused harm to Travis, whether they knew who might have harmed Travis, or even if they knew where Travis's body could be. He even asked them if they were actually being truthful about this entire UFO story. All the men denied causing any harm to Travis, or knowing who may have harmed him. They denied all knowledge of a location of Travis's body, and insisted that they had indeed witnessed a UFO. 5 of the crew members passed the polygraph examination no bother, while Alan Dallas, he couldn't complete the test, so that one was declared inconclusive. Part of Mr. Gilson's official report stated that the polygraph examinations confirmed that these 5 men had indeed seen something that they believed to be a UFO. Furthermore, the tests showed that Travis Walton had not been harmed or murdered by any of these men on that Wednesday night. In the end, 5 out of the 6 men were found to be truthful according to the exam results, making them convincing witnesses. The polygraph examiner thought that if the UFO story were fake or a hoax, then these 5 men had no prior knowledge of it. Once the test results were released, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie announced that he accepted the UFO story as true, believing that the men were telling the truth about the Travis Walton alien abduction incident. This announcement understandably caused a stir. News of Travis's disappearance and the unusual circumstances surrounding it soon attracted the attention from international news reporters, UFO enthusiasts, and curious individuals who travelled to Snowflake to investigate. During one interview, Dwayne revealed that he and his brother Travis had a shared keen interest in UFOs and would have jumped at the chance to get as close as possible to a real UFO. Additionally, Dwayne mentioned that he himself had witnessed a UFO incident similar to his brother's back in 1963. Shortly after these interviews, Snowflake's town marshal declared that the entire incident was a prank, orchestrated by the Walton brothers. He claimed that they had tricked the logging crew by releasing a balloon at just the right time. However, the marshal's wife, she came out and said that she disagreed and thought that her husband's explanation of this balloon was just as far-fetched as Dwayne Walton's UFO story. The authorities wanted to preserve the scene of the incident for a thorough forensic examination, But this became impossible due to the flood of local and international visitors who all flocked and came to see what actually happened. People had mixed reactions to the story. Some admired the courage of the crewmen and believed their account, whilst others labelled them as liars or pranksters, suggesting that the whole thing was nothing but a misguided joke. Many wondered when Travis would suddenly reappear, leaving everyone to question, where is Travis Walton? The 11th of November 1975 marked Travis's return, and with it came an even more bizarre tale that began to fill in the gaps of his mysterious disappearance. The last thing that he remembered after approaching the UFO in the forest was being struck by a beam of light, and then everything went dark. When he woke up, he was in excruciating pain, overwhelmed by thirst, weakness, and struggling to breathe. A brilliant light hovered above him, and the air felt thick and humid. As Travis slowly regained consciousness, he initially thought that he was in a regular hospital, surrounded by 3 figures dressed in orange jumpsuits, which he just assumed were medical practitioners. But as his vision cleared, he realised that these were not humans. These were nightmarish beings. He described them as having a basic humanoid appearance, standing less than 5 feet tall with bald heads and no hair. Their heads were oddly large for their small bodies, almost resembling oversized fetuses. The most unsettling aspect of these creatures was their eyes. They had huge, almost entirely brown eyes, with very little white visible. These eyes seemed to penetrate right through him. They lacked eyelashes and eyebrows, and their noses, ears and mouths, well, never really moved. Travis went on to describe them as slender, with delicate hands that had no fingernails and skin that looked something like the surface of a marshmallow. He tried to fight back and push away the closest creature, but it felt squishy and gave way easily. With a shaky voice, he shouted at the bizarre beings to get back. In desperation, Travis grabbed an unbreakable glass-like cylinder from a nearby shelf and started waving it around and brandishing it like a makeshift weapon. In a sudden and unexpected twist, these beings retreated from the room, leaving an open doorway. This gave Travis the chance to escape the examination room via a dimly lit hallway. He soon found himself in a dark, spherical chamber, where a solitary high-backed chair sat in its centre. As he approached the chair, the room illuminated like a planetarium, stars swirling across the curved ceiling. When Travis stood, the starry lights vanished, revealing what seemed like a rectangular outline on the wall. A potential door. Curiosity compelled him to search for it, but then a sound caught his attention from behind. Slowly turning, he saw a tall figure in a sleek blue bodysuit and a glassy helmet. Their eyes were, also unusually large, gleaming with a bright golden hue. The strange being guided Travis into a colossal chamber, resembling an aircraft hangar. It was that big. Travis's eyes widened as he realised that he had just departed from a disc-shaped craft, eerily similar to the one that he encountered in the forest just before that eerie bluish light took him. However, this craft was at least twice the size of that one. Within moments, Travis was ushered into yet another room and gently placed on a small table. A woman, bearing an uncanny resemblance to the tall, helmeted man, handed him an oxygen mask, which he reluctantly put on. Before he could resist, Travis felt himself growing drowsy and eventually passed out.
Attacking more fully, just making way past them. The only doorway I could see was on the other side of them.
And it looked like a doorway?
Yeah, it looked like a doorway, just,
And what did they look like?
I guess it's a pretty typical description nowadays. Very large eyes, hairless, two eyes, nose, mouth. I didn't see them speak or no change in the expressions. That was the most terrifying experience of my life. But when I tell this story and try to relate to people, I'm trying to communicate what I experienced and how utterly, utterly traumatic that was and how it was so devastating. I was, on the verge of catatonic for weeks after it happened, but
When he awoke, it was a chilly night and Travis found himself outside a gas station in Heber, Arizona. One of the disc-shaped crafts hovered just above the highway, disappearing into the distance a few moments later. Unbeknownst to Travis, he had been absent for 5 whole days, while he had only assumed that a few hours had passed. Desperate to make sense of this bewildering ordeal, he reached out to his brother-in-law Grant Neff. Grant was initially sceptical when Travis called, but eventually made the drive to Heber with Duane to bring him back home. Upon his return, the missing man from Snowflake, Arizona became the centre of attention, besieged by UFO researchers, authorities, profiteers, skeptics and the media, all craving details of this sensational story. But amid this chaos, Travis's family's main concern was his health. His brother Duane received a call from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation, also known as APRO, a civilian UFO research group. APRO pledged to arrange a thorough medical examination for Travis. The National Enquirer, renowned for its penchant for sensationalism, financed APRO's research in exchange for an exclusive interview with Travis. The medical examination ultimately revealed that Travis was remarkably in good health, with no traces of drugs or any other foreign substances in his system. In the midst of this shock and confusion, Travis found himself facing a polygraph test. The entire situation was quite the controversy because Travis and the examiner had a heated argument about how the test was being conducted. Nevertheless, Travis managed to pass 2 more polygraph tests later on. We'll come back to that. All of Travis's fellow workers who witnessed that eerie spacecraft also underwent these polygraph tests. Most of them passed with flying colours, except for one whose results were deemed inconclusive. As anticipated, there were those who dismissed Travis's tale as a complete hoax. They accused the media of exaggeration and claimed that it was just all a ploy to make some quick money. UFO researcher Philip Klass even went as far as to say that Travis' polygraph test was just poorly executed, and he accused Travis of using deceptive tactics during the test. He also pointed out several inconsistencies in the stories told by Travis and his colleagues. Cognitive psychologist Susan Clancy had a different take on the situation. She suggested that Travis might have been influenced by a TV movie called The UFO Incident, which was about the alien abduction claims of Betty and Barney Hill back in 1961. Interestingly, this movie aired just 2 weeks before Travis's own supposed UFO abduction. Both Klass and Clancy believed that Travis may have been inspired to stage his own sort of alien abduction, all in an attempt to gain some instant fame. And indeed, Travis became quite the sensation. As the case continued to capture the public interest, it became a media circus, generating headlines and sparking heated debates across the nation. Various investigations were launched, including polygraph tests administered to the crew members. These tests supposedly indicated no signs of deception, but their methodology and reliability were heavily criticised by some. From a biological perspective, there's an important detail about polygraph tests that many people may not fully grasp. Firstly, polygraph tests are not admissible in court. Many mistakenly believe that failing such a test equates to guilt, but the actual accuracy of polygraph tests is only around 50% or maybe even 60% at best, despite claims of them being 80 to 90% accurate. This discrepancy is significant. It blows my mind how in the past the perception of these polygraph tests were crazy wrong, and sadly they would lead to some awful results. Innocent people being locked up for life or worse. Even here in the UK there was a Jerry Springer style TV show called Jeremy Kyle. To say that this was utter trash TV is underselling it. There's a few YouTube videos on here that dives into the mental crap and horrible practices of that show. This show relied heavily on polygraph tests. These episodes would air and would supposedly demonstrate without a doubt that people were lying. Anyway, look, we're not here to talk about that nonsense, so let's get back to the story at hand. Here's how polygraph tests work. They rely on physiological responses like heart rate and blood pressure. If these indicators spike while answering a question, it's considered a lie, because lying can unintentionally elevate these physiological responses. The issue here arises when someone actively tries to manipulate the results. They can intentionally raise their heart rate and blood pressure when answering straightforward questions, like what's your address or what's your pet's name. This artificially inflates their baseline, so when they do actually lie, well, there's no noticeable difference in their physiological response. Moreover, even when telling the truth, a person might misinterpret the question, leading to another physiological response that would register as a lie. The point is, look, polygraph tests are far from foolproof, which is why they're not admissible in court anymore. That's why investigators often don't place much weight on someone's willingness to take a polygraph test. If you ask me, these things equate to nothing more than silly pseudoscience and should be taken off the playing field completely. So, the huge overarching question is simple. Did it actually happen? Now, I feel the need to point out that, as with any video on this channel, I'm only reporting on what I've uncovered. I've not gone into this story with any preconceived bias as to its validity. Normally, I would say that if one were to completely and faithfully believe Mr. Walton, then they would only tell the story that supports that belief. The same is true if one were to set out to completely debunk it. There's YouTubers out there that completely make fun of it and call it outright crap. Conversely, there are some very famous YouTubers who completely ignore any evidence to the contrary and tell the story as gospel without looking at the evidence from both sides. It's important that we search for the truth. 5 days after Travis' mysterious disappearance, his brother-in-law Grant Neff received an eerie midnight phone call from Travis, asking for help at a payphone outside a gas station in Heber. Neff and Dwayne, Travis's brother, rushed to the scene and brought him back home, but they kept it a secret from the police. Instead, they decided to drive to Phoenix the next morning to meet with a doctor. Their hopes were crushed when they discovered that this so-called doctor, Lester Stewart, wasn't a medical professional at all. He was just a hypnotherapist. The police were quite puzzled and somewhat annoyed when they only found out about Travis' return through the news a few days later, as neither Dwayne nor Mike had bothered to inform them. The police began to suspect foul play, or a hoax. To investigate Travis' story, the police looked into the phone booth incident. They confirmed that a call was actually made from that phone booth to the Neff home around midnight that night. But here's the funny part. None of the fingerprints on the phone belonged to Travis. There were other unsettling aspects as well. While search parties were out looking for Travis, Dwayne and Mike, well, they spent all of their time giving interviews to UFO investigators. Among the recorded interviews that investigators shared with the police, two particular stories stood out. Mike Rogers admitted that he was in trouble with his Forest Service contract, and he seemed to hope that Travis' disappearance might somehow help him out of this predicament. Dwayne, on the other hand, revealed a strange secret. He claimed that both he and Travis had always been passionate about UFOs, believing in their existence. They even said that they had frequently witnessed UFO sightings together. What's more, they had discussed what they would do if one of them were ever abducted. Now, that in itself, that doesn't make them liars. I mean, come on, we've all thought about it or discussed what we would do in any strange given situation. Another significant character in this story needs to be addressed. The National Enquirer tabloid newspaper. They had an enticing $100,000 prize for anyone who could provide proof that UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin. The Enquirer reached out to the Waltons and suggested that they take a lie detector test to see if they might qualify for this prize. However, Travis and Dwayne, they didn't really want to do that. So the National Enquirer, recognising their concerns, offered a secret deal. If they didn't pass the lie detector test, well, the results would remain confidential. The Walton brothers agreed. I mean, wouldn't you? That's a win-win situation. If they pass the test, it just bolsters their claim and they get a hefty payout. If they fail the test, well, no one will ever know. The National Enquirer hired an examiner named McCarthy for the polygraph test. To their dismay, McCarthy described Travis and Dwayne's test results as the plainest case of lying that he had ever seen in 20 years. Dwayne was furious, shouting threats in frustration. As per the agreement, the Enquirer kept the failed examination hidden from the public for the longest time. However, local UFO investigators weren't convinced that this was a simple deception, so they arranged for another polygraph test conducted by an examiner named Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer reported the results as inconclusive, but the UFO group, well, they changed it and publicly declared that the tests were positive, confirming the truth of Walton's story. It's worth noting that Travis later claimed to have passed his examination in his book. As the years went by, both of the other examiners, Gilson and McCarthy, they reviewed the results and agreed with Pfeiffer that they were inconclusive. This is the point where the story seemed to lose all momentum. Travis secured a book deal titled The Walton Experience and managed to make some money from that. It's widely believed, although never proven, that the book may have been ghostwritten by Jerome Clark, the editor of the International UFO Reporter. The National Enquirer eventually did pay up, though not quite the grand sum the Waltons were hoping for. Instead of the elusive $100,000 prize, they received a mere modest $5,000 for having the best UFO case of the year. Travis received $2,500 of the total amount, while the other 6 men, well, they got to split the other $2,500. As this story unfolded, it became clear that not all the pieces of the puzzle were lining up. Much of the information about the case, including the police initial suspicions and the suppressed polygraph test by the National Enquirer, came to light thanks to the relentless investigation of Philip Klass, a full-time UFO investigator from the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Feeling the pressure, Mike Rogers proposed a new round of polygraph tests for everyone involved to settle this matter once and for all. He offered a seemingly fair agreement. If they passed, Philip Klass would pay for the exams, but if they failed, the UFO group would cover the costs. However, this seemingly fair proposal had a twist. It was only valid if Klass agreed to one particular examiner, a man from San Diego who had an unusual reputation. See, this examiner was known for administering polygraph tests to plants. Yep. See, he was attempting to prove that plants have feelings, and he was going to do this with a polygraph. Fast forward some 18 years, and Travis' book The Walton Experience was adapted into a movie called Fire in the Sky. The film took significant creative liberties with the story, as the studio believed that Travis' own account, well, it just wasn't interesting enough. In conjunction with the movie's release, the studio arranged for Cy Gilson, the polygraph examiner who had originally passed Mike Rogers and the crew, to test Travis, Mike and one of the crew members again. Not surprisingly, they all passed the test with flying colours. Jerome Clark, a prominent UFO editor, has went on record as saying, "After more than 2 decades, Walton's credibility survives intact. No shred of evidence yet brought forth against it withstands sceptical scrutiny." However, the truth is a bit more complex. The main issue here is that there's a significant lack of concrete evidence either supporting or debunking this story. First, let's talk about the absence of physical evidence. If Travis Walton had indeed experienced a violent encounter with a mysterious light beam, we might expect to see some sort of injuries, disturbances on the forest floor, or signs of trauma from his 5 days of disappearance. But none of this was ever found. Medical examinations failed to reveal any evidence. The primary support for the Walton case comes from many polygraph tests. Travis and his crew have often cited these tests as solid proof of their story, focusing on the positive results and completely ignoring the negative ones. What's more, when we consider the few physical, testable aspects of this story that should exist if it were true, we come up empty-handed. There's simply no concrete proof that anything out of the ordinary happened during Travis's disappearance. The alternative explanation, that this was a scheme by a group of young UFO enthusiasts looking for attention or financial gain, well, that seems a bit more plausible now. It's essential to apply critical thinking to any extraordinary story, like an extraterrestrial abduction. We should always ask for evidence. In the case of the Travis Walton story, the evidence falls short. It leaves us with more questions than answers, and a significant lack of concrete proof to support these extraordinary claims. In 1958, there was a sci-fi novel written by Robert Heinlein called Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Comparing the main character of this novel to that of Travis Walton, well, we find a few similarities. See, both of them have a fairly high IQ. They refer to themselves as a country boy and see their future in electronics. Both of them encounter a flying saucer at night, they're blasted unconscious by a blue beam, wake up lying on their back in a wedge-shaped room, are groggy and don't know where they are or how they got there, think they might be in a hospital, escape that room and go around a curved corridor, have the run of the ship for a wee minute, then find an object they intend to use as a weapon. They enter a control room of the saucer, and they describe it as having a hemispherical domed ceiling like a planetarium. They're amazed when star images appear all around them. They eventually return to Earth many days later, dropped off at the side of the road late at night. They go into town, they phone for help and assistance, and both are shocked when they learn that it's not the day they thought it was. So there's maybe a little similarity or two there. I have no way of knowing whether the Walton brothers were Heinlein fans or if they even read that book, but Dwayne is on record saying that they were both lifelong fans of UFOs and science fiction. In March of 2021, something surprising happened in this Travis Walton case. Mike Rogers, a key witness, made a statement on his Facebook page saying, "I, Michael H. Rogers, being of sound and rational mind, do hereby give notice that I am no longer to be considered a witness to Travis C. Walton's supposed abduction of November 5th, 1975. Later, Rogers explained that his decision was based on a secret Travis was keeping from him about a new movie remake of the incident. He felt hurt and angry because Travis had always kept secrets. He believed that Travis wasn't an honest person and he wanted to distance himself. In April, Rogers had a phone call with a producer named Ryan Gordon, who was working on a new film about the Walton incident. Gordon had recorded the call without Rogers knowing, which is legal and is allowed by Arizona law. 2 months later, July 4th, Gordon publicly posted the audio from that call.
All I can remember, is that we were talking in the woods one day, Travis and I, and I remember leaving a chainsaw on the stump. Okay, he had a saw, but he took his with him because we were talking about creating a UFO hoax. Okay.
Yeah.
So there you have it, the story of Travis Walton and his alleged abduction by aliens. It is a story that has been debated and discussed for over 40 years. Is it true? Is it false? There's no easy answer. Some people believe that Walton's story is without a doubt. It's real. They point to the fact that he passed polygraph tests and that his crewmates corroborated his story in full. Other people are sceptical of Walton's story. They believe that he may have hallucinated it all, or that he may have been abducted by humans and not aliens. They also point to the fact that there's no physical evidence of the UFO that Walton claims to have seen. Ultimately, whether or not you believe in Travis Walton's story is up to you. There is no right or wrong answer. However, I hope that this video has given you a better understanding of the case and has helped you to form your own opinion. In the meantime, stay safe out there, folks. Tell someone you love them, and above all else, remember, keep smiling. It was 1966 in Westall, Victoria Cross in Australia that this next video takes place. This is basically the Australian version of the Ariel school case. Again, multiple witnesses at a school see a UFO, so without further ado, let's get into it. For the children of Westall High School in Victoria's Clayton South, there was no indication that the day of the 6th of April 1966 would be among the most remarkable of their lives. Around 11 AM, a group of students was returning to class from a sports lesson at the school's oval when a number of them spotted a large grey and silver saucer-shaped object floating through the sky. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. I've been enjoying covering some UFO cases recently, so why buck the trend, right? Let's get a wee look at the Westall UFO case. Children ran excitedly out of their classrooms and onto the playground. There was buzzing chatter about flying saucers. We don't want to miss that. It was later alleged that some of the children collapsed with fright, terrified of what they were looking at. Saying all that though, the object that they could see clear as day seemed harmless. The saucer-shaped craft slowly hovered across the school before vanishing over a row of pine trees and landing in a nearby paddock. Around half an hour later, to the excited screams of the children and the disbelief of the teachers, the craft would re-emerge, slowly rising once again above the trees before rapidly shooting off at unearthly speeds to the northeast. Later reports suggested that the craft was being pursued by planes, yet witness statements taken after the fact vary on this detail. A short time after the ship's departure, the school would get another strange visit. However, this time it wasn't from the skies above. This time, it was military and police personnel. Of course, the usual protocol took place. Kids and teachers were forbidden from talking about what they had seen that day. The principal of the school soon released a statement to the media saying that the whole thing was nothing more than a case of mass hysteria.
A teacher who claimed to see UFOs hovering over a Melbourne school says military officials threatened to have him fired if he ever spoke about the incident. Andrew Greenwood is talking publicly about the famous Westall High sightings 55 years ago for the first time.
Those that were there that day, that witnessed these events, were obviously left with so many questions, but no answers would come. Now, 56 years later, many of them are still looking. Westall is the unofficial name of an area called Clayton South. This tiny suburb has been inhabited by European settlers since the mid-1800s, and it sits around 13 miles outside of Melbourne's city centre. Westall was first synonymous for farming and produce, but by the 1950s it was expanding and moving to more industrial ventures by opening a Volkswagen factory and assembly line. This, of course, would attract more residents and businesses, and jobs were now in abundance. Despite all this, Clayton South is a relatively small suburb, even to this day with a population of less than 15,000 people. Melbourne itself had a rapid influx of migrants looking to settle there, attracted by the growing industrialisation and lucrative job offers. Underneath it all, there was still fear and unease. People were afraid, and not without reason. The terrible devastation caused by World War II were still within living memory. Then, as now, there was no guarantee that far worse would not take place in the future. So, it was against this prosperous yet paranoid background that the Westall sighting took place. There are many, many stories of aliens and UFO encounters in Australia, far too many to mention, but I'm sure I will cover most of the interesting ones in an upcoming video. The case of the Westall UFO sighting certainly stands out from the usual unknown and strange lights in the sky type of incident, often spotted by a single witness and proved by a grainy photo or shaky video. This incident, similar to that of the Ariel school case, was seen by hundreds of witnesses and attracted the attention of the police and the Royal Australian Air Force. Although the sheer number of witness accounts offers a much higher degree of credibility in these cases, it does not offer greater clarity. Inconsistencies in testimonies, pressure to keep quiet, and other mysterious events would mean that the truth would remain elusive. Shane Ryan, a teacher from Canberra and also an amateur investigator, helped the search for answers in recent years. In 2011, he created a documentary called Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery. This documentary certainly helped bring the case to the masses, gathering a national and international crowd of viewers. But despite all this, the government has still failed to come forth to address the case or release some sort of statement. Of course, like so many other cases similar to this one, with no official explanation given, theories range from experimental government craft or mass hysteria to the old chestnut of weather balloons. Had this been in Europe or the United States during that time period, I'm sure the government would have cited the Cold War as a reason. But it's Australia. So what really happened that non-assuming normal day in Westall? An intriguing variation on the weather balloon explanation. UFO researcher Keith Basterfield suggested in 2014 that it may have been the result of a secret radiation testing project. Using the Freedom of Information Act and laws and existing documentation from the National Archives, Basterfield found evidence of the Hibal program, which was a joint US-Australian project that ran from 1960 until 69. During this span, large silver balloons were used to monitor radiation levels, largely due to the controversial nuclear tests that had taken place in Maralinga, South Australia, just a few years before. These balloons were equipped with a 180 kilogram payload of relevant testing equipment and were followed by a light aircraft responsible for remotely triggering its parachute to descend. The documentation Basterfield uncovered suggested that one of these balloons may have been blown off course towards Clayton South after launching near Mildura. Such an explanation certainly fits and explains the presence of both the police and the military at the school. Though with the launch documentation either missing or destroyed, Basterfield admitted that he can't be entirely certain that the balloon is the culprit. Experts say that it's still a very open-ended mystery. Until the Defence Department opens up their files and shares what they've got, we'll never know. Irrespective of what actually happened, The Westall UFO undeniably had a profound impact on the lives of all those who witnessed it. Numerous witnesses still regularly appear in the media to discuss this case. Shane Ryan continues to investigate, looking for the truth and acting as support for those who witnessed the UFO firsthand. It's hard to know whether the answers will ever come completely apparent, and to some degree, it may not even matter. Let's face it, if the government came out tomorrow and admitted everything, saying that it was a top secret government project, then the masses that believe otherwise would simply say it was just a cover-up. Whatever happened that day, it remains one of the most profound UFO encounters in modern history. I honestly doubt we will ever get definitive answers for this, and many cases like it. The only thing I think will make a difference is if another, more recent case occurs. Who knows? Maybe we won't need to wait too long for that to happen. That's it for another story, folks. Thanks once again for hanging out with me today. Stay safe, and as always, keep smiling. Next up is probably the most documented, famous and controversial alien abduction case in history. This is the Betty and Barney Hill incident. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Today we delve into a story that has baffled scientists, captivated conspiracy theorists and ignited the imagination of countless individuals for decades. It's a tale of an ordinary couple, Betty and Barney Hill, who found themselves at the centre of an extraordinary and otherworldly encounter.
What is your name, please?
My name is Barney Hill.
Were you alert when you were in the ship and awake?
More like in a somnambulistic state.
Were they the same build as us? I mean, you know, or did they like have pointy heads or something?
No, they had large cranium and the chin was very small.
In September of 1961, their lives would change forever as they embarked on a seemingly routine drive through the dark, winding roads of New Hampshire's White Mountains. Little did they know that their journey would become a harrowing odyssey into the unknown. Witnessing strange lights in the sky, lost time and eerie memories, Betty and Barney Hill would become the first ever documented case of alien abduction in the United States. But what really happened during those mysterious hours? Were they truly abducted by beings from another world? Or was there a more rational explanation? This is the Betty and Barney Hill incident unearthed. When we hear about UFOs, aliens and the possibility of being taken by them, our minds often drift to Hollywood movies, pop culture or stories from those who claim close encounters with extraterrestrials. Most folks tend to dismiss these claims as wild fantasies, maybe the result of mental illness, too much alcohol or drugs, or simply someone just seeking attention. But here's the thing, despite the skepticism, the concept of alien abductions, it's never really quite found its place in the world of serious discussion. Even though there are ongoing investigations, sightings and governments revealing UFO secrets that have stirred global intrigue recently. Yet, a few stories, sightings and investigations have stuck around for decades, refusing to fade into obscurity. Think about the Roswell crash back in 1947, the Aurora, Texas UFO incident in 1897, or even the Nazis' mysterious interest in the occult during World War II. Yep, that's a thing. These cases have kept the world talking about the unknown. Now, let's zoom in on one particular story. Picture this, it's the late 1950s, a time when the American dream was alive and kicking. But for Barney and Betty Hill, it was more of an American nightmare waiting in the shadows. Who were they, and what happened to them that would forever link their names to something called the fourth kind? Before we delve into the mystery of their lives, let's take a moment to get to know them. Barney and Betty Hill was an American couple. They knew all too well the weight of gossip, suspicion and ridicule. You see, they were one of the few mixed-race married couples in their hometown of Portsmouth in New Hampshire. Barney was born in 1922, and he was working for the United States Postal Service, while his other half, Betty, 3 years his senior, well, she was a social worker. They had a beloved dog named Dalsey, who you'll spot in their old photos and portraits. This little guy was right with them when all the weirdness happened. Now, let's talk about what they were up against. Being a mixed race couple in those days, well, they caught a lot of flack, racial slurs, insults, but they never let that stop them from their church duties and community service. They were regulars at the local Unitarian congregation, and both were card-carrying members of the NAACP, which is the civil rights movement that had been around since 1909, and that stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. Barney even had a seat on the local Civil Rights Commission board. Despite all this, they never had any children, but their story sure has outlived them. September 19th, 1961, out in the boonies of New Hampshire, they claimed that they got snatched up by aliens. This is where the Hill duo faces got plastered all over the news. UFOs, extraterrestrials, they became the poster couple for Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. They talked about it openly, spilled the beans in interviews, they went under hypnosis, and they aired it all out in public. They even revealed one piece of shocking evidence. See, Betty had scribbled a kind of star map, which they claimed led to the Kraft's home system of Zeta Reticuli, which Betty was able to detail down to a T, connecting this whole alien abduction case. We'll come back to this later on. The world couldn't get enough of their story. It went big time in 1966 with John G. Fuller's The Interrupted Journey book, and when the 1970 film The UFO Incident was released. Roll in the internet age and the UFO conspiracy scene, and their legend just kept growing. People all over the place started gathering evidence to back up the idea that we are not alone in the universe. Betty's notes, her recordings and documentation got tucked away in the University of New Hampshire's vaults, and in 2011, the New Hampshire Historical Resources Division, well, they slapped a historical marker at the spot where they claimed that the spaceship first showed up. This just gave a nice nod to the Hills and their wild story. But hey, let's go back to where it all started, back in 1961.
September 19, 1961. Bonnie and I'm driving home from Montreal. Saw a strange light in the sky. We changed direction, came in, started following us.
So let's go back and figure out why they were even on that road in the first place. You see, they needed a wee break from their crazy lives, so a road trip seemed like just the ticket. Montreal, Canada was their destination, a sort of belated honeymoon, considering that they had been married for 16 months already, but they just never got around to celebrating. Barney had been pulling all-night shifts at the post office, clocking in 60 miles round trips to tend his job. Betty too was swamped with her job, making it tough for this couple to have any quality of time together. So they said, you know what, to heck with it. And they grabbed their pooch, Dalsey, and snagged $70 that they had lying around. Off they went on their adventure, a sweet 3-day escape to Canada. They soaked in the beauty of Niagara Falls, and more importantly, realised just how special their bond was. But then, there's always a catch, right? News broke that a hurricane was gearing up in the area, determined to mess with their route back home. So they decided to cut their trip short. They stopped for a quick Java fix at a Vermont diner, and by 10 PM on September 19th they were back on the road. Their aim was to be back home in their beds by 2 AM the following morning. But, you know, best laid plans and all that. About 30 minutes into their journey, so roughly about 10:30 PM, Betty spotted something strange in the sky as they approached Lancaster, New Hampshire. From the south end, it was like a bright light, kind of floating around from the direction of the moon, between the moon and Jupiter. At first, they didn't pay much mind to this, but Betty's eyes kept creeping back to that light, which just kept getting brighter and bigger as they got closer. Barney, being the practical chap that he was, decided to take a look also. Betty seemed to be bothered by it, and for Barney, that was all he needed to find out just what was going on. Now, the guy knew his stuff about aviation because he had served in World War II, but his conclusion, well, it was probably just some lost satellite. But hold on to your hats, because this is where things go off the rails a little bit. As they wound their way up a hilly road, that light started playing Follow the Leader with their car. Keeping a safe distance, up high, not too close but not too far away. It was like this thing knew the road well. It was avoiding trees and mountain peaks like it had some sort of GPS. The weirdest part, it had its sights locked on their 57 Chevrolet Bel Air. Betty and Barney, curious as ever, decided to pull over near Twin Mountain. They let their wee dog Dalsey stretch her legs, and Betty, being the savvy traveller that she was, had packed some binoculars from their Canadian sightseeing adventure. She figured that it was the perfect time to break them out and get a closer look at whatever this strange light was. What Betty described as a weirdly shaped craft just hung up there in the sky, still glowing like a neon sign, and it kept getting clearer as she peeked through her binoculars. She told her husband, Barney, to come take a look, thinking that it might be some satellite or military plane. Yeah, it wasn't any of those things. It started heading straight for them, steady as you like. They were driving through Franconia Notch Mountain Pass at this point, and they couldn't take their eyes off this object. Barney even grabbed his handgun from the glove compartment. Betty, well, she was trying to figure out the size of the craft as it passed over Cannon Mountain, guessing it to be around 40 feet in length. It was now so close that they could practically see the nuts and bolts, and they were scared out of their wits.
You know, the old-fashioned straw hats that men used to wear, the flat crown and the brim, that's what it was shaped like. And then along one side, it had a big, big picture window.
Barney had had enough at this point and stopped the car. He kept his pistol aimed at the object, and Betty was looking through her binoculars, ready for anything. They both felt like they were in some sort of sci-fi nightmare. Then Barney started seeing things, like 8 to 10 human-like figures inside the saucer. They were peering out of the windows, gazing down at them. They recounted that they could see them so clearly that they witnessed the beings on the craft moving around and peering out at them. One of those aliens, well, they decided to have a little chat with Barney. Not verbally though, but with telepathy. He could hear the entity's voice in his head, clear as a bell, as if it was standing right next to him. It was like they were telling him, stay put and watch. His gut told him to fire his weapon, but he couldn't move, paralysed by fear and probably something else. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on, forced on him by those beings. The aliens were described as being dressed in these slick black outfits with black caps. The craft started descending, and these hatches popped open, dropping a long slide-like platform from the belly of the ship. Lucky for Barney, there was a momentary glitch in whatever weird mojo was holding him in place, and he sprinted back to his car with Betty and Dalsey the dog sitting with sheer terror in their eyes. Before they could haul ass and get away from the ship and its otherworldly occupants, all they remember is loud beeping noises, and their car was vibrating like it was possessed. Now fast forward 2 hours and they snap back to consciousness, about 35 miles from where they last remembered being. They hightailed it home to Portsmouth, scared out of their wits, and the whole drive back they just couldn't shake this feeling that something beyond their understanding had just happened.
They were a form of human being.
They were a form of human being.
Right.
Did they have cat-like or Cheshire-like eyes?
They had larger eyes than ours, smaller nose, and smaller mouth, no protruding part of the ear and no hair.
It wasn't until they got back behind closed doors that they stopped to take stock of this entire situation. They were both covered in dirt, and more shocking was that both of their watches had stopped at the exact same time. Once their bizarre encounter was over, little did they know how this terrifying tale of theirs would become a big deal in the months and years that followed. They couldn't stop washing themselves either, almost obsessively. They were worried about radiation, or who knows what other kind of violations. Betty also noticed that her dress was torn, with zippers burst open, and covered in this mysterious pink powder that to this very day, no lab tests have been able to decode. They tried drawing what they saw that night and piecing it all together, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Their car had these weird circular markings on the hood, and they discovered that when a compass was anywhere near the pair of them, it would spin erratically. That's when the dreams started. Well, should I say, nightmares. So, about 10 days after that close encounter, Betty Hill started having these really vivid dreams, the kind that stick with you long after you wake up. At first, they brushed it all off as just mind tricks, but soon enough they couldn't ignore it any longer. In one of those dreams, they found themselves on a dead-end road, and out of nowhere a bunch of men surrounded the car. The dream suddenly shifted and Betty was led into the woods by two small guys in blue uniforms with skin that looked like a mix of blue and grey. Her husband Barney, well, he was in some kind of weird trance following along. Her dream ended with them back at the car motionless, watching those men climb into a craft that looked exactly like the one they saw before. It was like a replay of the real life events and the lost time between encountering those grey creatures and regaining consciousness in the car, and it shook Betty to her core. No matter how hard they tried, that sense of dread, paranoia and fear, it just wouldn't budge in the months after their encounter with this strange UFO. Betty kept referring to those dreams, getting obsessed with finding the truth. She stumbled upon the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena at the local library, and after some serious talks with Barney, they decided to report their sightings to that group and the US Air Force. They had simply no idea what they were dealing with, and they hoped that someone out there might have answers, or at least a wee clue as to the weirdness that invaded their lives.
And then at NICAP in Washington, I wrote to them because I wanted to know, being exposed to a UFO, close range, was there any health problems? Were we exposed to radiation? What kind of dangers?
It was now October 22nd, 1961, when Barney decided to go on record with the committee. He made it clear that what they witnessed that night was something out of this world. And those creatures, well, they sure as heck weren't human. The case landed in the lap of Walter Webb, an astronomer from Boston and a NICAP member. They sat down with the Hills for an extensive chat that stretched over 6 hours. They talked in depth about every detail that they could remember. And let me tell you, Barney was an absolute mess. He felt frustrated, confused and scared. He thought that he might be losing his marbles because of the missing time, the foggy memories and the nagging feeling that, well, there was just more hidden away inside his head. But here's the twist. Mr. Webb came out saying that he actually believed them. He thought the Hills were telling the absolute truth and that the whole incident probably went down just like they described it. I mean, sure, there were some minor hiccups and uncertainties, but that's par for the course when you're dealing with stuff like UFO sightings, right? You've got differences in perception, judgment calls on size and distance. Now, here's where things start to get closer to the truth. After Webb's report, they recommended some hypnotic therapy for the Hills. The idea was to help them come to terms with what happened and maybe dredge up some more details. One of the big questions was the missing time. Why couldn't they recount for those hours and distance that they covered during a blackout? All they remembered was the blazing orb sitting on the ground somewhere on Route 35, along with Barney's worries about Betty's dreams and mental state. Well, that was enough to kick off the therapy. They started with Barney, and after a few weeks of those sessions, he began remembering being led into that alien capsule. He woke up after passing out from the pressure and vibration, and there he was, in a weird examination room with bright lights, strange shaped walls, and a tiny table that he was strapped to. The creatures didn't waste any time. Those beings got him stripped down and started poking and prodding like he was some sort of lab rat. Under hypnosis, Barney divulged to Simon, one of the investigators, about how he and his wife went through some terrifying stuff. They had hair, nails and skin samples yanked out of them. Wires were hooked up to them all over the place. But the real nightmare fuel was when one of those creepy creatures stuck a giant needle into Betty's belly, like they were giving her some kind of twisted pregnancy test. Poor Betty, I mean, she screamed like hell. Barney remembered finding himself in the middle of a dark forest, bumping into a gang of guys who guided him around like he was blind. Betty completely backed up his story, saying that those aliens used telepathy to chat with them, speaking in a language that made absolutely no sense, but then they were somehow able to understand it. This is a fairly common occurrence in these types of claimed experiences. Betty's hypnosis sessions had a few variations here and there, but the core of what happened to this couple was pretty clear. They ran them through the ringer with a bunch of neurological tests, interviews and hypnotic sessions. Dr. Benjamin Simon, that I mentioned earlier, well, he wrote up his findings in a journal called Psychiatric Opinion, a medical journal which focused on various mental illnesses and mysteries of the mind. He attributed the case of Barney and Betty Hill to that of psychological aberration, which is considered to be a deviation from normal mental activity, which results in derangement and or psychopathy. But he didn't think that they were making it up. He came up with some reasons and symptoms to explain what actually was going on. Now, Project Blue Book, the Air Force's top secret UFO study that ran from 1952 until 1969. Well, they weren't buying any of this. They brushed off the Hill story, blaming it on everyday problems. But the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, well, they had their back. They even called their account fairly credible. But here's where things get really weird. Betty, during one of her hypnosis sessions, well, she doodled out something that turned out to be a star map. It looked just like some random scribbles at first, but it ended up being the talk of the town, starring in a book called The Intrepid Journey, 2 Lost Hours Aboard a Flying Saucer in 1966. So after hearing about the Hill couple's wild tale, this New England-based American author named John G. Fuller got all excited and got the thumbs up from the Hills and Dr. Benjamin Simon to turn their entire adventure into a book. Fuller was no stranger to supernatural stuff. He'd already written a bunch of articles and books on the spooky side of life. He dove into this project headfirst, gathering every piece of information, no matter how small or irrelevant, to put together this book, including Betty's star map doodle. When Fuller's book, The Interrupted Journey, hit the shelves in 1966, it took off like a rocket and got folks talking about UFOs and close encounters all over again. But it was Marjorie Fish, an elementary school teacher and amateur stargazer, who got really hooked on this. She read Fuller's book and in 1968 decided to become a detective of the stars. She wanted to figure out where those aliens and their spacecraft came from. So, Marjorie Fish got down to business and analysed Betty's drawing, trying to match it up with the cosmic map of space.
4 years after the incident.
Now, in 1969, Marjorie Fish came here and stayed a few days and asked me all kinds of questions, hours and hours, which she taped, and then used that to go back home and
Took
did
your
the
map.
research on it and identified the areas.
The area of the star map, which she said was in the constellation that we know, Reticulus, in the star system was Zeta Reticuli.
Yeah.
Fish's detective work led her to believe that the drawing was a dead ringer for the Zeta Reticuli star system. This is a double star system hiding out in the Reticulum constellation in the southern sky. It's about 39.3 light years away from Earth. After Fish's deep dive and a report sent over to Walter Webb, they all agreed that the drawing was a match for the Zeta Reticuli system. And here's the kicker. Betty Hill had no clue about this cosmic connection. There was simply no way that she could have replicated such a thing. Now, even though many folks, including astronomers and investigators, threw some shade at Fish's theory, it sure got people scratching their heads. I mean, how does someone with no space smarts end up drawing a star system 39 light years away from Earth whilst under hypnosis? In 1989 they launched this fancy satellite called Hippocar over at the European Space Agency. A real trailblazer. Its job was to jot down where all the stuff in the sky was positioned. They used radial velocity measurements from spectroscopy to figure out how stars moved. This mission ran up until 1993, but whilst it was up there, astronomers thought to themselves, hey, let's see if that Marjorie Fish woman was onto something. So they pointed their tech at the Zeta Reticuli system. It turns out some of those stars on Fish's map were way further away than first thought. Poor Miss Fish had to step up and say that maybe she was wrong. Now, let's dive into the skeptics' pool. Robert Schaefer, he worked for the Skeptical Inquirer. Well, he took a shot at the Hill couple's story after attending the National UFO Conference in 1980. Betty Hill herself was there, showing off these mostly blurry UFO pics and claiming that aliens were poking around her life still. But things got wild when her talk dragged on far too long and the audience turned on her. Robert noticed that Betty was going all out UFO crazy after her husband had passed away, going on vigils and attending UFO conferences. She was becoming really obsessed and trying to make sense of what happened to her and her husband in 1961. At one of these vigils, a local named John Oswald tagged along. He was into the whole UFO scene also, but he said that Betty, well, she couldn't tell the difference between a UFO and a streetlight. Another local, Jim McDonald, he had his own take. See, he analysed the whole story, focusing on the route that the couple took from Canada. After checking it out plenty of times himself, McDonald thought that the spaceship was simply a warning beacon that was up on Cannon Mountain. He claimed the beacon flickered on and off at the same time the hills said they were being chased by the UFO. McDonald had his own theory, saying it all came down to stress, lack of sleep, and false memories. Let's talk about this stress word that keeps popping up in the camp of folks who don't buy into alien abduction stories. No doubt being a mixed race couple during a turbulent time in the US had to be tough. They must have faced some serious heat from racists who couldn't open their own minds. That kind of pressure would have strained any relationship. On top of that, they had a boatload of responsibilities at their local church and in the community, which chewed up all of their time and energy. So, it's not out of the question that they were just burned out and maybe seeing things. Psychologists have gone on to say that sometimes our minds fill in the blanks with made-up stories, especially when we can't make any sense of mysterious events or timelines. Some people even suggest that the Hills might have seen the UFO craze and Cold War paranoia as a chance to make a quick buck, like they planned a well-coordinated scam. Maybe Betty got wrapped up in her obsession with UFOs and tried to cash in, snapping pictures of stuff that she claimed were parts of alien spacecraft. Barney Hill sadly passed away at 46 due to a cerebral hemorrhage, and that was in 1969. While Betty lived till she was 85, and she passed away in 2004 due to cancer. They never remarried or had any kids, yet even today, the Hills 1961 story, well, it keeps a lot of people fascinated. From UFO buffs to filmmakers and investigators, they're still stuck on that mysterious night in 1961. Plenty of documentaries have tried to crack this nut. And word as of late 2022 is that Netflix is planning a deep dive into the couple's story with another documentary of their own. And you can't miss the roadside marker on Daniel Webster Highway in Lincoln, New Hampshire, commemorating their story and their legacy. So here's the big question then. Were Betty and Barney Hill the real deal? Victims of a crazy alien experiment? Did they truly have a close encounter of the fourth kind, only to be laughed at and kicked out by folks they turned to for help? Or maybe, just maybe, they were playing a scam game in a world that was losing its marbles already to fear and paranoia. Who knows? We live in a world soaked in tech and science, where we're always exploring the cosmos and sharing our stories. But some tales, like the Hills, well, it just keeps us guessing. One thing's for sure though, something went down that night, making us wonder who we are and who else might be out there.
Nobody can tell me there's not life on other planets.
Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, folks. As always, I truly appreciate you all. Please stay safe, tell someone that you love them, and no matter what, remember, keep smiling. So, Rendlesham Forest in England. This case mainly took place at a military base there. I remember doing research for this video and I had to condense a lot of it down because there was just so many documents and official transcripts to work through. Hopefully it all makes sense. Enjoy. Ah, the 1980s. My absolute favourite decade. The music was great, the movies were awesome, and although the fashion was somewhat questionable, I can't help but look back on it with fond nostalgia. They say that the 80s fashion is making a comeback, you know. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. So, what makes a good UFO case? Let's go through the checklist. Solid evidence? Check. Credible witnesses? Check. Sightings of a craft? Check. In fact, how about 2 official military personnel standing close enough to sketch and even touch the craft? Check and double check. We've got it all, from eyewitness testimony to audio recordings by high-ranking officials and even an appearance of the Men in Black. So, sit back, get your feet up, and let's look at the Rendlesham UFO incident. The 1980s are famous for so many things. In 1981, Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States. By that time, the Cold War was still ongoing with the Soviet Union. Reagan had decided that enough was enough. Soviet forces had invaded Afghanistan, which made things worse for the superpowers of the world, and it was time to put an end to it all. Meanwhile, back here in the UK, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was of the same opinion as Reagan, and as such, she basically told him whatever he needed, whatever we could do to help, it shall be done. The President poured countless dollars into the funding of the armed forces. The idea was to move American forces across to the UK. From there, it would be easier to launch across the English Channel and into Europe. In order to help accomplish this, Reagan ordered a complete phase-out of all F-4 Phantom fighter jets in order to make way for the new and improved fighter, the A-10 Thunderbolt. In a strategic move, the US moved the Tactical Fighter Wing's 3 squadrons across to various air bases in Europe. 2 of these bases were hidden deep in the forests of East Anglia in England. In the county of Suffolk, there were tons of air bases dotted throughout the countryside. These were no longer active, but were key positions during World War II in the fight against the German Luftwaffe. 2 of these air bases now played home to the 78th and 79th Tactical Fighter Squadrons. Half of them were posted at RAF Bentwaters and the other half RAF Woodbridge, around 6 miles to the south. Between the 2 air bases were nothing but forest. 15 square kilometres of woodland known as Rendlesham Forest. So by Christmas of 1980, the American servicemen were settled into their respective bases, all the while keeping their eyes on the prize, keeping focused on their objective and thinking about the Soviet threat. Little did they know that the Soviets wouldn't be their only concern, and that they would be forced to deal with something they were not expecting. Something not of this earth. At around 3 AM on the 26th of December, memories of Christmas Day were still fresh in the minds of those on duty, when suddenly the emergency alert system at RAF Bentwaters was activated. I imagine for any military personnel stationed at these bases, it must be terrifying when the emergency alert system activates, because that usually means something is coming. Deafening sirens filled every room and corridor of the base. Anyone that was asleep was now awake and in full response mode. The alert would be heard from miles around, putting not only the military staff on high alert, but also alerting the locals that there was something in the sky. Armed personnel spilled out of doorways. Air Force sentries ran across parade squares and car parks in order to take up defensive firing positions along the base's perimeter. One of these soldiers was Airman Steve Longero. He was on duty at the time and on foot patrol near to the base's weapons lockers when the alarm activated. He took up his designated position along with several colleagues along the fence line. He suddenly became aware of something moving, but it wasn't up in the sky. It was in the thick of the surrounding woodland. So what exactly was Airman Longero looking at? Well, he reported to have seen an unearthly red glow. Several of them, in fact, and they were moving through the trees back and forth at great speeds. All witnesses were fixated. The bright lights flew around in varying directions, erratic and random. On more than one occasion, these strange orbs collided with one another, which caused a shower of bright red sparks and what sounded like a metallic crash, only to shoot off again at breakneck speeds in opposing directions. On a number of occasions, these objects were seen to almost stop, only to hover slowly high above the tree line into the night sky, almost as if they were taking a wee peek to see what was around. The main control tower of the airbase was also picking up these strange objects. They could see them clear as day with the naked eye, yet they were giving off no form of radio signature and were not being picked up by radar. The order was given across all comms that at no point were personnel to attempt to investigate. They were to stand fast and do nothing other than observe. Around this time, 6 miles to the south at RAF Woodbridge, the guards that were stationed at the east gate had radioed to report having observed a small aircraft of some kind slowly descend into the woods a short distance away from the airfield. Lieutenant Charles Holt was the duty officer that night. He was the man giving the orders and as such instructed a small patrol to head out to Rendlesham Forest to investigate and validate the sightings. He dispatched a 3-man team into the forest, consisting of Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston, Airman First Class John Burrows, and Ed Cabinsag. They later reported that the closer they got to the site, the warmer it got. All 3 men also became aware of a constant humming noise, a noise that only grew more loud and intense the closer they got. The 3 airmen were startled when they heard strange and unnatural screams and cries, which appeared to be coming from the area they were heading to. As the men looked at each other, regained their composure, and continued on with their orders, they soon realised that the screams were that of the livestock at nearby Capel Green Farm. It would appear that someone or something had frightened the animals and worked them up into an audible frenzy. Staff Sergeant Peniston made the decision that the men should split up. Why? He was clearly not a fan of horror movies. Splitting up is never a good idea. His orders were for Cabinsag to follow the tree line for a short distance to the north, in the direction of the other base RAF Bentwaters, which would leave Burrows and himself to continue further into the forest. They hadn't gone very far when they entered a small clearing in the woods. Before them, they saw a strange metallic object hovering a foot above the ground. Neither of the men could identify the origins of the craft. Even though Peniston was a qualified specialist in aircraft identification, he had never seen anything like this, whether belonging to the Soviets or American Air Forces. It was described as being shiny, metallic, and a triangle shape. It was illuminated by a series of small red lights and even smaller blue ones. They could both see underneath the craft and noted a strange yellow mustard-coloured mist being emitted onto the ground below. As the 2 airmen cautiously approached the craft, it remained perfectly still and silent. Peniston noticed that there were no markings on the exterior of the object, none whatsoever, no joins, no rivets, or any signs of manufacture. There were no signs of a propulsion system or exhaust ports either, and certainly didn't seem to have any visible steering mechanism like flaps or fins. It seemed to be smooth, almost like the entire structure was one single piece. Burrows stopped in disbelief, but the staff sergeant was a wee bit more curious. Burrows watched as his senior officer approached the hovering craft. Only once he got right up close to the craft. Peniston was able to see strange markings that he would later say resembled ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. With a shaky hand, Peniston reached out and touched the ship's exterior. He described it as utterly smooth and warm to the touch. He described this moment by saying that as his hand passed over the surface and onto the engraved symbols, it felt like his hand went from sliding across a sheet of glass and onto sandpaper. He also said that he could feel a light humming sensation beneath his fingertips. Suddenly, and without warning, the staff sergeant felt a jolt, as if a small current of electricity was being passed through his body. The hieroglyph symbols began to light up to the point where the bright light was so intense that it temporarily blinded him and obscured his view. It was like someone shining a very bright torch directly into his eyes. He would later go on to say that at this time, as he was trying to regain his focus, he could see what he described as a long string of ones and zeros dancing around at the edge of his field of vision. This went on for a few minutes, when it abruptly came to an end. The 2 airmen remained at their positions, still watching the craft. Peniston had commented that he felt no strangeness or ill effects after what had just happened. The men were able to take extensive notes and sketches of the craft, as they were actually stood in the clearing watching it for about 45 minutes. Then, in an instant, the object unexpectedly shot off, horizontally and at lightning speed, deep into the forest, moving swiftly, avoiding trees and objects as it went. The 2 men then hurried back to rendezvous with Cabinsag, who was waiting for them. He had also said that he had seen the object shooting through the woods, although not in the same detail as his crewmates. All 3 men made their way back to the East Gate, where they reported the encounter to the waiting Lieutenant Colonel Holt. Once the men had relayed to the Lieutenant Colonel exactly what had happened, he didn't scoff at them or disbelieve them. He was a stickler for protocol, so he simply formulated everything into a formal report and passed it on directly to his superiors and the local police. An investigation was underway and more military personnel were dispatched to the clearing. It was reported that they discovered strange indentations on the ground along with burn marks. Over the next few days, Holt was both frustrated and surprised that his report had not garnered any type of response from his superiors. So when another group of airmen reported yet seeing another strange anomalous object hovering around the woods, he decided this time to venture into the forest with a small team. He wanted to see what was going on for himself. In the early hours on the 28th of December, a small party of military airmen entered the woods and headed for the clearing described by Burroughs and Peniston. Armed only with flashlights and a Geiger counter, they couldn't take any other equipment such as weapons due to Rendlesham Forest being technically out of their jurisdiction. Holt had also brought along his portable tape recorder, so he could dictate any findings as the squad ventured deeper into the forest. Once they arrived at the clearing, he discovered a series of circular markings scorched into the ground. At a wider angle, it was clear that the total sum of these markings formed a large triangle shape. Further investigation of the site revealed similar burn marks on the trunks of surrounding trees, as well as several broken branches and destroyed foliage. When the airmen got closer to the marks which had scorched the earth, the Geiger counter they had equipped would click faster, sending the reading to over double that of normal background radiation levels. Holt continued to dictate the findings into the tape recorder before one of his men shouted a warning. Up above them in the sky to the east, a strange red-coloured object could be seen, an object similar to what the men had experienced before. It was descending fast, right towards the group of airmen.
0148, we're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmers' barnyard animals. It's very, very active, making an awful lot of noise.
Yeah, been a pigmentation.
You just saw a light where? Wait a minute, slow down. Where?
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there, sir. There it is.
Hey, I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
So, can I get some of it? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. I'm going to switch off it. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from the site. Is it back again?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's the flashlight set. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead.
Yellow?
It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird. Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow stare, a dark stare. It's like the pupil of an eye looking at you and winking.
On the Lieutenant Colonel's tape recording, he describes what he was seeing as being like an eye winking down at the men below. Stopping before descending fully, the object changed direction and began to move away from them. The group was able to follow the object for a short distance before they all witnessed it breaking up into 3 smaller objects. These smaller craft began whipping around the night sky just above their heads, performing manoeuvres never before seen or even possible with anything on Earth. The objects emitted a red glow and travelled at impossible speeds. A short time later, the men opted to return back to the base. These strange orbs had now took up a formation directly over RAF Woodbridge before putting on yet another aerial display, buzzing back and forth and at high speeds across the airfield. It was witnessed that the crafts were periodically beaming a crimson light down onto the weapons lockers dotted across the base. This went on for some 3 hours before suddenly shooting off again towards the sea, passing back over RAF Bentwaters as they went. This left American military personnel wondering what the hell had just happened. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt produced a detailed report of the events that night in Rendlesham Forest. This report was dutifully submitted to his superiors as well as British military officials. This report, however, was completely dismissed out of hand. They accused the airmen of being naive and that they simply misunderstood everything that they had witnessed. This entire ordeal, as well as the subsequent report, may well have been brushed under the carpet, as with many similar reports, but the main issue here was that this was not the first incident like this to have taken place at RAF Bentwaters. Back in 1956, radar operators based there had picked up several unknown objects rapidly approaching from over the sea. These objects were unidentified and appeared to be travelling at several thousand miles per hour. At this exact moment, a C-47 transport aircraft was making its final approach to land on the runway at RAF Bentwaters, when it had to abort the landing as a fast-moving white light suddenly shot across its path, startling the pilot. RAF Lakenheath was another similar base 60 miles to the north. They received calls from the radar team at Bentwaters, and they too confirmed picking up these anomalous craft travelling at great speeds on their own radar screens. It wasn't long before they could see the objects with their own eyes. They were no longer little blips on a radar screen. They were here. The ground crews at RAF Lakenheath witnessed groups of red and green coloured objects buzzing around the skies to the south. Fighter jets were immediately scrambled to intercept and soon were up in the air where they relayed visual confirmation of the objects. Almost immediately, one of the fighter pilots had to abandon the recon mission as all of his onboard navigational instruments started to malfunction at the same time. The remaining pilots reported that they had been outpaced and outmanoeuvred by these objects, one of which had aggressively pursued one of the Venom fighter jets until he too abandoned the mission and returned to Lakenheath Air Base. Like most of these reported events, especially back in the 1980s, both British and American governments attempted to write off these events as meteor showers. So, back to the 80s now. The Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Air Forces for the whole of Europe was General Charles Gabriel. He was given the task of investigating the events which took place that December in Rendlesham. It took him over a fortnight to eventually arrive at Bentwaters, and it was abundantly clear that he was not there to listen to the witness accounts or to entertain any woohoo theories about little green men flying saucers. According to Gabriel and his team of investigators, the objects which had been sighted in the Suffolk skies that December were nothing more than the remnants of a Soviet rocket which had been re-entering the atmosphere. Even the accounts of the Lieutenant Colonel and his team of the incidents which took place on the 28th of December were similarly explained away. Along the coastline from the two RAF bases sat the Orford Lighthouse. If you remember, during Halt's account, he said that it appeared as though the light was winking at the men. This statement, and the time it takes for the lighthouse lamp to complete a full rotation, coupled with the timings of the Allied sightings recorded in Halt's tape recorder, led Gabriel's team to conclude that the lighthouse beacon was the cause for this phenomenon. But what about the clearing where the craft had landed? There was evidence that surely can't be explained away so easily. Well, they did. They reported that the strange scorch marks and indentations left behind were nothing more than animal burrows. The strange marks left on the trees? Well, they claimed that these were left by forestry workers, or maybe even youths playing a prank. General Gabriel and his team's investigation obviously came under scrutiny, especially by the professionals involved that had witnessed the incidents firsthand. It's well documented that he refused to listen to any explanations that would be deemed out of this world, as well as the lack of cooperation with the British authorities and the fact that the people, airmen and staff involved were heavily intimidated and coerced by senior officials. Those that witnessed and reported these bizarre events, including Steve Longero and the sentries posted at RAF Bentwaters, were ordered to sign official secrets documentation barring them from discussing these events for a period of no less than 30 years. However, for the staff at RAF Woodbridge, the investigating team would take more drastic steps to ensure secrecy. During interviews, those involved were instructed not to discuss what they had seen with anyone else. They were expressly forbidden from doing so and told that if they went against these orders, that bullets were cheap and would be used to enforce silence. Some of the airmen had stranger experiences. One such airman was summoned to attend an interview of sorts. This was to be conducted at a property that was off base. This was, of course, strange in of itself. Why off base? It would go against so many security protocols. So as not to question authority, the individual attended the meeting anyway. When he arrived at an old farmhouse, he was met by two men that he described as looking incognito. He felt uneasy before even arriving at the meeting, but now this feeling was replaced by foreboding and fear. There was something very wrong with these two men. He claimed that they had doll-like eyes and had strange, bizarre mannerisms. After being in the presence of these two men for a little more than half an hour, the airman made some excuses and left the meeting. He was positive that these men were certainly not who they claimed to be. When he had returned to the base and spoke to his superior officers to ask for an explanation as to why that he was summoned to a meeting off base and who the hell were the two interviewers, his bosses would not only say that they had no idea of the meeting, but they also demanded to know the location of the farmhouse, as this was not a military order. A small team, along with the airman that was the subject of said interview, attended the location only 2 hours later. However, upon their arrival at the farmhouse, it was run down and dilapidated. No one had been in or around the place for years, despite the fact that only 2 hours prior, the airman was sitting in a fully decorated and well-lit farmhouse being asked dodgy questions by two strange men dressed in black. This whole encounter affected the young airman to such an extent that he had to seek therapy in the following months. The aggressive tactics, threats and psychological manipulation used by the American authorities to contain the incidents at both RAF bases were in stark contrast to the actual official reported findings. So let's assume then that the officials are right and all the events of that night were nothing more than natural phenomena with normal explanations. Then why bother going to such great lengths to cover up and suppress the testimony of the witnesses? Let's step away from aliens and spacecraft for a wee minute. What if it wasn't extraterrestrial, but it still warranted a mass cover-up? What if the actual truth would be as equally as terrifying if it got out to the public? It was a well-known speculation at the time that the reason the US military were setting up shop at RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge was not only for a tactical advantage against the Soviets, but to stockpile nuclear weapons. It even got so much so that the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had to come out and say that this was not the case. It was theorised that rather than the crafts being alien in nature, that they were in fact the Soviets themselves. Witnesses who have spoken about the case claimed that the beams of light they saw were concentrated on the weapons lockers on the bases. Could this have been some sort of advanced experimental Soviet tech that was being used? The thing with that theory is, it's been 40 years since the incident, and the world has yet to see such technology from any nation, let alone Russia. Of course, as with any such incident, theories and explanations will come out. The more time that passes, the more people want to try and get their opinions heard, some of them silly, and some of them more credible than others. One of these theories is that the whole incident was nothing more than a government experiment, and the staff and airmen involved were the unwitting participants. Some have speculated that it may have been some sort of mind control experiment that the men were unaware of. It was also alleged that the whole reason for the US military being at both air bases had nothing to do with the reasons that they gave. More recently, a local resident was in the process of upgrading his internet and was told by the cable engineer who carried out the upgrade that he had uncovered a mysterious bundle of buried cables that all led to the base. Apparently these cables were large, thick networking cables that dated back to the early 80s, many years before such a thing had been invented. Besides the allegations that both bases were used as secret testing grounds for experimental weapons, theories have emerged about the personnel stationed there. It's been alleged that the whole incident was nothing more than pranks being played between the staff at the two bases, and that red lights were installed on the patrol vehicles in attempts to scare each other. It's also been claimed that it was all down to a British SAS team that were ordered to test the security and resolve of both RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Sure, any one of these claims or theories could well have been what happened. Maybe the SES rigged smoke canisters and popped wee red lights onto parachutes and stuff like that. Maybe it was just a great big hoax carried out by servicemen driving around in illuminated patrol vehicles. Or maybe it was nothing more than hallucinations brought on by secret government experiments in mind control. But then what about Jim Penniston and John Burroughs, spending all that time so close to a flying craft that they were able to touch it, even make sketches of it? Neither of the officers had reason to lie about such outlandish things, certainly not at the risk of ridicule and potentially losing their careers. In the years since the incident, the men have retired and been diagnosed with and treated for PTSD. Penniston has come forward to say that he doesn't actually believe that the craft he interacted with that night came from outer space. He said he thought it came from someplace much closer to home. Jim Penniston described the sensation he felt when he touched the craft as some kind of information download. In later years, he would meet with UFO experts and provide copies of the sequences of ones and zeros that he had written down at the time, as they were still fresh in his memory. The staff sergeant said that at the time of the incident he didn't even know what binary code was and would only learn of that later in life. Analysis of his notes looking at the series of binary code would reveal a message. That message would claim that the craft originated in the year 8100 and that it had in fact travelled back through time as opposed to travelling through space from another galaxy. As well as this information, the code also contained coordinates for various landmarks throughout history, including the pyramids and Stonehenge. This testimony from Penniston is certainly thought-provoking and interesting. What makes it even more interesting, though, is the striking similarity of his version of events to that of an incident which took place in the US town of Kecksburg back in 1965. Witnesses there reported seeing and experiencing an almost identical craft described at Rendlesham. It was the same shape and was adorned with the same markings. Could this have been the exact same or similar craft, maybe stopping off at another time and location? Lieutenant Colonel Holt, since his retirement from the United States Air Force, has maintained his story. He spent many years investigating, discussing and conducting interviews about this incident. He has written books and been involved in numerous documentaries, all the while sticking to his original account of what actually took place. Holt in his testimony is certainly harder to discredit than that of young servicemen racked with nerves and anxiety. Holt was a veteran of both the Vietnam and Korean Wars. He had a long and experienced career in the military and was revered by his superiors as being not only experienced but also had high honour and integrity. In the years since the incident, no one has ever been able to convince him that what he witnessed that night was a result of airmen speeding around in vehicles adorned with red lights or the rotating beacon of a distant lighthouse. It's clear that the US High Command have done nothing but try their very best to discredit Lieutenant Colonel Holt's reports in this case. Are we really meant to believe that several hundred American airmen stationed across 2 military bases all misinterpreted and misunderstood what they were seeing? These were seasoned and highly trained soldiers that held ample experience from previous events in their respective military careers. The dismissive nature of the explanations offered by the American superior officers failed to take into account that these incidents took place across 2 different nights and at 2 different locations. There's no doubt that something other than the normal explanations offered did indeed take place and is very hard to explain in conventional means. Therefore, it would be reasonable to conclude that something certainly did pay a wee visit to the rural Suffolk forest on that chilly December morning over 40 years ago. So, what's your thoughts on this? Do you think it was an extraterrestrial? Maybe you have another theory that's not yet been put forth. As I always say, I want to thank you all so much for spending the time with me today. I appreciate every single one of you. Stay safe out there, folks. Watch out for wee green men in flying saucers. And as always, keep smiling. So, our last video of the compilation is a two-parter. This is the famous Hopkinsville case where a family get tormented by little green aliens. If you've ever seen the movie Signs with Mel Gibson, when the family are all in their wee log cabin type house and they can hear the aliens scurrying around the property, well, this is like the real life ordeal. Before I sign off and leave you to the last video, I just want to say thanks. We're all busy in our lives, we all have a million other things that we could be doing with our time, but if you're watching this right now, that means that you've decided to watch my videos, and that means more to me than you could ever imagine. So, anyway, enough of me blabbering on. Here's the Little Green Men of Kentucky. The duty sergeant was on night shift at Hopkinsville Police Station. All was fairly quiet, when all of a sudden an entire family burst in through the front door and hurried up to the front desk. The story they frantically told him was out of this world, literally. He laughed with amusement only to see that the family members stood before him shaking and visibly traumatised. The sergeant couldn't possibly know that what had just went down would be the most well-documented case of alien visitation in history. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Let's dive down the rabbit hole and get a look at the Little Green Men of Kentucky. The southern state of Kentucky is known for many things. For me, it's all about the Jack Daniels, and I love me some Jack. Besides that, the bluegrass state, like many other states, is home to many myths and legends, as well as some very strange and unexplained paranormal events. One of the oldest being the sightings of mysterious cryptids similar to Bigfoot. Locals dubbed the creature the Hillbilly Beast. One that really freaks me out is the Fisherville Goatman, or it's sometimes called the Pope Lick creature. This creature is said to be able to mimic a distressed child's voice in order to lure unsuspecting passers-by to their doom. It was a warm summer's night on the 21st of August in 1955. There was a wee stretch of land between the rural communities of Kelly and Hopkinsville in Christian County. On this land sat a small homestead. This household was about to fall victim to a sinister attack by a group of strange creatures. This story is like something out of a sci-fi novel, and it may have figured that way if it were not for the sheer amount of people involved in this well-documented case. The event itself was witnessed by 11 people, consisting of 8 adults and 3 children, and later would involve several members of law enforcement and even the military. For the residents of the house, the events which unfolded were nothing short of terrifying, and as I mentioned earlier, would go on to be the greatest case of extraterrestrial visitation. So, what exactly happened? About 100 yards or so from the main house was a water well. Earlier that night, one of the occupants, Billy Ray Taylor, ventured out to fetch a pail of water. Billy Ray and his wife June were there staying with friends for the weekend. The house itself was owned by the Lankford family. Glennie Lankford lived there with her 3 children. Glennie had 2 older sons from the previous marriage, Elmer Sutton, who went by the name Lucky, and John Charlie Sutton, also known as JC. It was the 2 older lads that Billy Ray was friends with. Lucky and JC were there with their own wives, Vera and Elaine. Elaine's brother, O.P. Baxter, had also came to the house to join them all for a late dinner. In total, this would make up the 11 people within the house. As Billy Ray walked towards the well, which, as I said, was about 100 yards walk from the main house, he dropped the bucket into the water and took a moment to admire his surroundings. The homestead was enveloped with thick, lush woodland, and it was then that he noticed a shiny metallic object hovering just above the tree line. It was reflecting the sunlight. He would later say that it looked like it was coming down in an arced path into the trees and had left a multicoloured trail as it fell. It was something that Billy Ray had never seen before. It was smooth and almost cigar-shaped. It had no wings that he could see and was utterly silent. It soon vanished down behind the tree line, which was followed by a dull thud. It was clear, or at least to Billy Ray, that whatever the craft was, it just crashed about half a mile away from the property. Billy Ray excitedly pulled the pail of water back up from the well and hurried back to the house. He told the people inside of what he had just seen. Bearing in mind it was the 50s in the south, so you can imagine their reaction when he blurted out that he had just seen a spaceship. Of course, everyone burst out laughing. It was like the boy who cried wolf, because Lucky and Billy Ray were famous for playing all kinds of pranks on each other. But this time, Billy Ray was not laughing. Sensing his agitation, the group soon curbed their laughter and started to come up with their own explanations. They suggested that maybe it was a meteor or a shooting star. Billy Ray insisted that someone come to the well with him, a task that his friend Lucky agreed to carry out. He wanted to show Lucky the exact area where this supposed spaceship had crashed. Surely they would go out and at the very least see some smoke over the tree line. Both lads then ventured out. By this time it was dark, and although it was difficult to see anything out there, they could still make out the tree line, and it was clear that there were no signs of smoke or anything else to suggest that a flying saucer had landed nearby. Lucky wanted to believe his friend, because he had never seen him act like this before. If it was a prank, then Billy Ray was acting his ass off. They eventually gave it up and agreed to return to the house. Food was almost ready, and it was time to eat. As they were walking back to the house, they heard a crackling noise from the trees, like branches breaking. They both turned and could see a dull glowing object. It was fairly low to the ground, and in fact almost on the ground, and it was moving towards them. They would later say that the glow wasn't like that of a flashlight, it was more akin to a lantern if anything else, yet it seemed formless. The men stood watching as the object moved closer towards them, and only when it got to within 20 or so feet, both men were overcome by a sudden feeling of dread. Both of them could clearly see what it was that they were looking at. They could not believe their eyes. They both looked at each other in disbelief before turning back and staring at the figure. It was a small humanoid with a bulbous head, short legs and long arms. It also had what would appear to be almost like pointy ears protruding from each side of its head. They could tell that the glow was coming from the creature's large oval-shaped eyes. I mean, this is freaky enough, right? I'm really not sure what I would do in that situation. Probably shite my pants. But what really set the lads on edge was the fact that the creature was still moving towards them. Only it wasn't walking at all, it was hovering, less than a foot above the ground. That was it. Time to go. Both men ran shouting and swearing back into the house, slamming the door behind them. As they stood there in the hallway out of breath, Glennie had gotten up from sitting with her guests and approached the two almost like she was about to chastise them. She asked what on earth was going on. Lucky told her that something strange had just come out of the woods and that they all should stay inside. Of course, she didn't believe any part of the story. She actually thought that Billy Ray had gotten Lucky outside and then they hatched a plan or a scheme to play a joke on everyone. So she was having none of this. She understandably didn't want the kids to get scared. Lucky immediately went and fetched his 12-gauge shotgun. He handed Billy Ray a .22 hunting rifle and told him to guard the back door whilst he watched the front. Glennie was getting a wee bit annoyed now. This joke was going way too far. As she was about to tell Billy Ray to put the rifle back, she suddenly let out a piercing scream. Standing just beyond the back porch was a small figure, and it was standing on the ground. Billy Ray fired a shot which went through the screen door and hit the figure, sending it rolling onto the ground. They would later say that when the bullet hit it, it made the same noise as if it was hitting metal. The creature then hopped up and moved off at great speed, into the trees. At this point, many of the house guests were drawn to the commotion. Billy Ray, feeling brave, stepped out into the doorway, all the while keeping his aim focused on the area of trees where the creature had escaped to. All of a sudden, and to the total horror of witnesses, a spindly hand reached down from the porch roof and made a grab for Billy Ray's hair. Aline was standing immediately behind him and grabbed him and yanked him back into the house. Everyone was screaming. In that instant, Lucky leapt out onto the rear porch and started firing shots up onto the roof where the creature's hand was just spotted. Just like the last, the creature fell off the roof with a metallic sound before hopping off into the woods, seemingly uninjured. Once everyone was back inside, JC joined the others after fetching his 20-gauge shotgun. At this point, no one knew who or what these strange creatures could be. All they knew for sure was that there was more than one of them, and bullets didn't have any effect. Glennie was very religious, so she naturally thought that they were demons. Lucky had said that it could be the cave goblins that were part of another local legend, whilst Billy Ray was saying that it's clearly aliens from the crashed ship that he saw earlier. Whatever was going on, it was far from over. The mumbling and frantic rants of the family were disturbed by yet another ear-piercing scream, but this time it came from the child's bedroom upstairs. The children had come crashing down the stairs, saying that they had seen a strange face with glowing eyes peering at them through the bedroom window. Lucky told his mother to take the children to safety into another room at the rear of the house, and he enlisted the help of JC, and they ran up into the kids' room. Seconds later there was another scream, as one of the creatures had appeared now at the window of the rear room that the kids in Glennie had just entered. JC ran into the room and fired a shot at the creature, shattering the window. Yet again the creature simply fell backwards before scrambling out of sight. These menacing attacks would go on for the next few hours. The family would hear footsteps and scratching on the roof and on the porch. If they looked out any of the windows, they would see wee creatures running around the yard and even in the trees. You know what it seems like to me? At any moment an alien parent is going to arrive and shout,
"Right you lot, what have I told you for about fooling around with humans? Get back to the spaceship and you take what you get when your father hears about this."
The strange thing is, well, one of the many strange things about this, is the fact that the creatures never really tried to get into the house. Witnesses said that they just seemed to want to have a look and see what was going on, and worryingly, they seemed more fixated on the children within. Whenever they got too close for comfort, particularly near the room where the kids were gathered, either Lucky or JC would open fire. They estimated that there were around 3 or 4 of these wee visitors, and over the hours in which they were defending their home and their families, the men would fire more than 100 shots. At around 11:30 p.m, when there was a stretch of inactivity and silence from outside, all the inhabitants of the homestead collected themselves and piled into the 2 trucks that were parked just outside. First stop, the police. The duty sergeant couldn't believe his ears. Little green men? Come on lads, you're having a laugh, right? But then his police brain kicked in, and he started thinking, you know, aliens or not, by the family's own admission there had been some sort of gun battle and shots were fired. That in itself needed his attention, so he dispatched officers to the Sutton farm. The entire complement of law enforcement and other agencies that descended on the homestead consisted of 3 sheriff's deputies, 4 city police officers, 5 state troopers, and 4 military police officers from nearby Fort Campbell. An investigation was underway. One thing was apparent right from the offset. Something had definitely happened here. The house looked like a war zone with bullet holes in walls, screen doors had been blasted apart, windows had been shattered by bullet fire, and rounds were embedded in the doors and door frames. Besides the countless shell casings and bullet holes, very little evidence remained of the otherworldly visitors the family claimed to have encountered. Although one of the deputy sheriffs noticed a strange glow coming from the tree line, he quickly grabbed 2 of his colleagues and they swiftly went out there to investigate. But this too yielded nothing. At the exact spot where Lucky had fired and hit one of the creatures, investigators came across a stain that gave off an odd sheen, but for some reason they were unable to collect a sample. During subsequent interviews with all present, the families all maintained the original story and did not deviate from their account of the incident. They all described the same creatures in the exact same way. They carried out routine door-to-door inquiries with the Suttons' neighbours, many of whom said that they had also seen strange lights in the woods at that time, but they just figured that the Suttons were using flashlights whilst searching for one of the pigs that might have escaped. They also confirmed hearing gunshots, but again they assumed that they were just firing on a predator like a bobcat and might have been on the property worrying the livestock. The authorities wrapped up the investigation for now. They had spoken to all the witnesses, spoke with the neighbours and searched extensively. At this stage there was not much else that could be done. The next day word got out. Several neighbours had went across to the farmhouse, some out of pure curiosity, wanting to hear what the hell had gone on the night before. Others wanted to ensure that the family was okay. However, when locals turned up at the Sutton farm, they found no one at home. The place was empty. This was because, in the wee hours of the morning, after everything had calmed down and the authorities left the scene, the families all went to bed. By this time it was around 3:30 a.m. Just as they were getting settled, Glennie had encountered yet another creature's face at the window. It would seem that they had returned. Thankfully, as morning was swiftly approaching, There were no more sightings of the strange beings, but not willing to take any more chances, all inhabitants of the homestead packed up their belongings and bundled into their trucks, leaving the farm in the rearview mirror. Of course, word soon spread, and the national media got involved. Newspapers, news outlets from across the country were trying to make sense of this story. Like most people with nothing to hide, the Suttons were open and honest about what had taken place. But soon it was apparent that the journalists and reporters were not really interested in the truth. They just wanted to mock and ridicule them. This made the witnesses shy away from the media attention and refused to comment any further. For years, heck, decades after this incident, the family and friends that were there that night have remained shut off. In the 67 years there have been a few occasions where the media have been able to speak to them. It's abundantly apparent that the story was not changed, not one bit of it. Despite it having been so long, their account of what happened that night back in 1955 has remained absolute. A few months after the incident, Glennie and her family would move out of the home and out of the area. The constant barrage of journalists, UFO hunters and fanatics descending on their property and intruding into their private lives was just all too much. But that's not the only intrusion that struck them with fear. They were also afraid that the creatures would return. In the 67 years since, this case has been known as the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter and the Kelly Little Green Men. Like any claims of alien encounters, abductions and stuff like that, the majority of responses are that of scepticism. Although the Hopkinsville PD dealing with the case have all gone on record to say that whatever happened that night, they're in no doubt whatsoever that the Suttons and their friends went through something. The fear and alarm was 100% real, no doubt. Skeptics would go on to say that it was an alcohol-fueled delusion. The Committee for Skeptical Inquiry were approached for comment, and a member called Joe Nickel went on record in saying that he believed it to be nothing more than a pair of mating great horned owls. Now, I'll be the first to admit, these owls are large for sure, and have these wee horny ear things that certainly do fit the descriptions of the beings. They even have big yellow eyes. Also, they are known to fly fairly silently, which could explain the notion that the creatures were floating above the ground. I could see people being sceptical if there were one or two witnesses to a brief event, but there were 11 people in that house, and it went on for hours. Even if all the adults were steaming drunk, and they encountered anything that they assumed were aliens, that's gonna sober you up faster than a toupee in a hurricane. There's a few good reasons why I would say that the great horned owls are not responsible for this. It's known that if they feel threatened, then, yeah, they will attack or scare off anyone by swooping. But this is usually from a great height. They wouldn't be running around in the yard. Secondly, they wouldn't be trying to grab at Billy Ray's head. And thirdly, and more importantly, owls are not bulletproof. Skeptics then fall back on explanations like mass hysteria, or that they simply just made it all up for financial gain. The cops found no evidence to suggest that the family were intoxicated that night. Also, with regards to the financial gain, well, they never made any money from the story. And why would they effectively destroy their own home and put themselves through ridicule, all in the name of a hoax and the possibility of maybe making a quick buck or two? The repair costs alone would have been substantial. Neighbours and friends that knew the family all vouched for them, saying that they were not prone to fabricating stories, never mind one of this magnitude. The Suttons just wanted to be done with it all and move on with their lives. They've been quoted as saying that they believe they were the victims of something which neither they or the people at large fully understand, and that they just want to live with it. I'll be honest with you folks, I've got my own personal views on this case, and a few like it. Whilst doing my research for this video, I went down the alien rabbit hole. Man, that's a phrase I never thought I would say, alien rabbit hole. I'm going to put forth my views and what I really think about it all, but first we need to visit another story. This one is from 2012, also in Kentucky. Did the wee green men return? In the coming days we'll find out when my concluding video on this case goes live. I sure hope you guys tune in. In the meantime, stay safe out there folks. Watch out for wee green men, but more than that, remember, keep smiling. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. This is part 2 of the Little Green Men of Kentucky. For context, I would advise you to pop over and watch the first part. The link is in the description below. This entire case is so fascinating that I just had to do a video on it. So, get your cup of tea at the ready and let's get into The Little Green Men of Kentucky Part 2.
Hello, my name is Dr. David Christie. I received your contact information through a mutual acquaintance who assures me that you are well equipped to investigate peculiar problems. Furthermore, I believe you may have interest in these events beyond any compensation that I am prepared to deliver in order to have these issues sorted. For the past 6 months, I have been living in a rural home located on the border of West Virginia and Kentucky, where my family is nightly assaulted by creatures that I have come to believe are of extraterrestrial origin. These beings appear to be the size and stature of a small child, devoid of any facial features save for large, oily eyes and lipless mouths. They frighten my children by peering through their bedroom windows, chirping at one another. They actively attempt to enter my home in the middle of the night. Last month they took my dog. The police refused to provide any further assistance, attributing the problems to wild animals and forwarding my complaints to the State Game Commission. I believe they are coming from an abandoned mine located on the edge of my property. Though I'm armed, I'm afraid that I'm far too frightened to enter the mine by my lonesome and cannot convince any sympathetic friends to accompany me, though I cannot blame them. I am convinced that the only answer is to collapse the mine. I believe this is where we can be mutually beneficial to one another. If you are prepared to assist me in this matter, I can offer you permission to record and document these events under the condition of anonymity. I can guarantee you evidence of these creatures which I assure you are not wild animals. Please respond ASAP. Thank you.
This was an email that had landed in the inbox of a paranormal investigator called Greg Newkirk of the website weekinweird.com on Sunday the 22nd of April 2012. I've also put a link to his story in the description below. Of course, this email was first thought to be some kind of hoax. I'm sure for any paranormal investigator, even this story seems a bit out there. What they couldn't comprehend at this stage was that this was the first step that would lead investigators to one of the most bizarre, intriguing and discussed cases in recent history. Greg Newkirk is an award-winning producer, full-time paranormal investigator and founder of the world's only mobile museum of the unexplained. In other words, he's a professional weirdo. For the last 2.5 decades, Newkirk has been tracking down and investigating cases of high strangeness, ranging from flying saucer crashes to cursed artifacts and everything in between. He's been featured on many TV shows, including The Unexplained with William Shatner, and even assisted Jeff Goldblum over on Disney Plus to find Bigfoot. At the time this email was received in 2012, he was running a ghost hunting team called Ghost Hunters Incorporated, and it was to this website that Dr. Christie's first email was sent. See, there were a few more emails from Dr. David Christie. That was until he seemingly vanished off the face of the earth. Greg replied to the email with a hint of sarcasm, but he was curious. He basically said that he had no experience with explosives or indeed cave goblins. He needed more details from the doc, and hopefully some proof. He never thought that he would get a reply from Dr. Christie. He had just wrote it off as a hoax, until he logged on the very next day, and sitting waiting for him in his inbox was a reply.
Thank you for the prompt response. I do not blame you for being skeptical of my story. I appreciate you keeping an open mind about my situation, and I am more than happy to provide you with as much information as I am able. I was given your contact information through a man by the name of Terry Wrist. When these disturbances first began occurring, I was only inclined to confide in a personal friend who I knew had fringe interests. He offered to share my concerns with a man that had dealt with somewhat similar experiences in previous years. I accepted his offer. Within a week, I was informed that this gentleman had long since retired from pursuits of this kind, but was willing to provide me with contacts who may be willing to help. This is how I came to contact you. I do not have any answer as to why other than a referral and a recommendation from a gentleman I do not know personally. I was under the impression that you would answer that question. I am located in Pike County, just outside the town of Hellier, Kentucky. Hellier is located roughly 30 to 60 minutes from the borders of Virginia and West Virginia, respectively. Most of Pike County is made up of small towns and rural communities. It is not uncommon to go days without seeing my closest neighbors. I moved to this area for the peace and quiet. I have received neither. I have lived in this area for just under 7 months, and in that time the majority of the harassment has occurred within the past 3. I did not become aware of any strangeness until early December, although that is only when I began to keep a record of these events. At first, it was merely strange tracks in the snow around my home. I had initially imagined that they were some kind of animal, though it closely resembled a human footprint minus the heel. At that time, I was under the impression that it was simply a single creature. It wasn't until the weeks later that I began to suspect that I was dealing with a number of what I thought were individuals hazing me upon my arrival to the area. At this point, I was incapable of keeping my dog outdoors overnight. Any attempt to leave her leashed would result in her barking herself hoarse until she was allowed back indoors. In the weeks leading up to this particular evening, I had awoken to find my shed doors open on several occasions, many of my children's toys missing or moved, and my yard in general disarray. I had already given a report to the police, who were making it increasingly clear that they were not interested in my case barring physical harm or large-scale theft. The second week of January, I'm having breakfast with my family when my 5-year-old daughter begins talking about the kids without hair. When my wife inquired about these kids, she informed us that she had spent the previous night watching them play in the yard. As you can imagine, this was of some concern. I asked my daughter what these kids looked like. She told me